Good evening, everyone. Welcome to West Orange Board of Education meeting, and welcome to West Orange High School. Mr. Calavano, roll call.
Mr. Charles?
Present.
Mrs. Lamb?
Present.
Ms. Mordecai?
Present.
Mr. Robertson?
Present.
Mrs. Schwartzbaum?
Here.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
notice of this meeting. Please take notice. Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided for in the following manner. That a written notice was sent from the Office of the Secretary of the Board at 4 p.m. on August 1st, 2017. That said notice was sent by regular mail to the West Orange Township Clerk and the editors of the West Orange Chronicle and the Star Ledger. That said notice was posted in the lobby and administration building of the Board of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Calavano. May I have a motion, please, for the minutes of July 24th and August 3rd?
I'll move that.
I'll second.
Thank you. Roll call, Mr. Calavano.
Mr. Charles?
Yes for July 24th. I'll abstain from August 3rd as I wasn't here.
Mrs. Lamb?
Yes.
Mr. Robertson?
Yes.
Vice President Schwartzbaum?
Yes. I think I was absent on was I present? Yes. So the ones that I was there, I was there.
And abstain on the other? President Mordecai?
Yes. Okay, it's time for the superintendent and board reports.
Thank you, Ms. Mordecai. We're going to begin with the demographic study report. If I can ask the board members just to have a seat in the front row. We'll have Mr. Grip, who is our demographer, prepare the report and take time to explain the slides that he has prepared for us.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Richard Grip from Statistical Forecasting, and I'll be presenting the results of a study that's been performed for the school district we've been working on for, say, the last 6 months or so. And tonight's presentation probably is going to be on the lengthier side. I'm going to try to keep it between 25 and 30 minutes, at which time I'll then turn it over for the board for questions, and if they want to take questions from the public as well, it's up to them. But if we have, we can ask that, I just ask that as I'm presenting, we hold all questions to the end, because I have a feeling there will be a lot that I'll answer as we go along. So just a very quick overview. The company that I work for is called Statistical Forecasting, and we work with school districts in the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area roughly since 1998. So it's almost the 20th year of the company. This is the only kind of work that we do. It's called school demography, which is a niche field of demographers who just work for school districts. I will say this is 99% of the work that we do. We've also been the chief consultant for the New York City Public Schools, doing this same kind of work since 2006, the largest school district in the nation. A little bit about myself. I'm the executive director. Founded the company 20 years ago. I used to be a teacher. I was a statistics and physics teacher for about 10 years in Bridgewater, Raritan, mostly, Del Barton up in Morris County, and Montville. I have a doctorate from Rutgers School of Ed in educational statistics and measurement. Most of us that wind up with that type of degree work for the College Board and work with psychometric related issues with testing, such as the AP test, SATs, things of that nature. But the superintendent of mine at the time at Bridgewater Raritan told me, he said, look, if you ever want to take a more applied approach, go into this thing called school demography, because there's not too many of these people out there, and he was correct. Presented nationally on this issue, both in journals and in presentations, and testified in court many a time at ALJ hearings. If school districts want a divorce, you may not know this, but they have to go through the courts to actually get that divorce. And it's those relationships where if you have a sending-receiving relationship with two communities, that's where you have to have that done. So most times when I go to a presentation, the first thing people want to talk about is the enrollment projections, because isn't that what the demographic study is all about? But the reality is it's just one piece of the puzzle. There's many layers to this study. So the first and most important objective to most of you out there is to project enrollments for the next 5 years. The number one question I get from most people is, why can't I present or project out more than 5 years, say 10 years? And the big problem becomes is that one of the key variables that we use in projecting enrollments is birth rates. So the most recent births that we have right now from the state is 2015, which would be our kindergarten class of 2020. So once you start getting beyond 5, 6 years out, I would then have to start projecting kids that haven't been born yet. That's a very difficult thing to do for a small town like this. And I say small because I'm used to working with New York, and we can project births for them because there's variables that we use for that, but you're too small to have any kind of statistical significance. So what other things do we look at? Well, we look at your historical trends, both at the enrollment level for the school district. We look at birth and fertility rates in the community's population trends, whether you're increasing or decreasing. The age structure of the community, that's real big. We'll talk about that in a moment. What impact do residential developments have on the projections? Are they going to have an impact? That's one of the big things. And the last purpose of the study was to compute student yields. Student yields is a fancy word for number of kids per housing unit. And what we did is we actually looked and tried to compute student yields by different types of properties in your town. Apartments, townhouses, single-family homes, so that we can figure out how many kids would come out of new developments in the future based upon what you currently have in your housing stock. So this graph right here is a picture of the community of West Orange since 1940. Everything to the left of that vertical line up there is census data every 10 years. And what you can see is that in 1970 there was this peak of almost 44,000 persons, and then there was a decline in the 70s and 80s, bottoming out in the 1990. But since then, things have been picking up. Everything to the right of that vertical line is the projected population of West Orange. This is not a projection that I made. This is from an agency called the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority. And they use several variables based on employment, things like that, to figure out what your population. They're not too far off, because if you see there for 2020, the population projected is about 48,000. The estimated population right now in the community is about 47.3. So they're pretty close. And we got another few years to go until we hit 2020. Now this is going to be hard to see, and I'm not asking you to even read much of this, but what this is a demographic profile. I'm going to pull this out of West Orange from 2000 and 2010. So it's separated into a bunch of variables, race up top, some characteristics about age, foreign born, so on and so forth. Here's a couple things I want you to look at. There's a couple things that have changed over the last 10 years from 2000 to 2010. The first thing was the racial distribution. It's becoming less white, more black, and more Hispanic. Okay, that's evident by some of the numbers up here. 67% white in 2000, 57 in 2010. That other data point up here called the 2011-15 ACS, what happens is the census gives us intermittent data between the two censuses, 2000, 2010, 2010, 2020. So some of this data on the right-hand side is intermittent between since the last census. Other important characteristics that I'd like to point out is the bachelor's degree or higher here is 48%. That's very high. The state of New Jersey is around 38, 39%. So this is a very educated community. The other thing I'd like to point out is the median family income is about $111,000. Median family income in the state is $89,000. So you're above that as well. And for those people who don't remember what a median is compared to a mean, it's just the 50th percentile. It's how many, 50% of the income is above that number and 50% is below. It's not an average. Other important things to see is the amount of renter occupied units. And this has not changed much from 2000 to 2010. About 1/3 of the housing stock is rentals. And what that means to me is there could be, of course, a lot of turnover from people that are moving into and out of the community as renters change and move all the time. So this is just a snapshot of your community over a 10-year period. All right, this is just a map of your community with all the schools posted on the map. And we're at West Orange High School right here. Kelly right across the street. And you can see what's important to know is who's your neighbors in terms of border. Because you have Orange on the eastern side, Livingston on the western side, Verona, Essex Fells up in the north. And we'll talk about some of the areas of your community that are most dense versus those that are not in a few moments. This is a map of your elementary attendance zones. In other words, which areas go where. And this is interesting because you can see Redwood is a very contiguous area, very large up in the northern part. But you got Mount Pleasant, which is green. And notice that it's all over the place. You got some sections down the lower southwest corner, a couple over here. So it's not necessarily a contiguous elementary attendance area. Why is it like that? I don't know. This has probably been doing it, they've been doing it this way for a long time. And it could be also because sometimes there's overcrowding in one school and a new development comes online and they need to kind of redistrict things by this type of pattern. Another example of something like that is St. Cloud. St. Cloud's got a piece here, a piece down here, and this big piece where the school is in the southwest corner. So as you know, all the elementary kids go to grade 6 for Edison, so there is no zones for that. But for middle 7th and 8th, you split between Liberty and Roosevelt, and you can see here some interesting phenomena as well. Look at this little hole right here, that little blue dot. They go to Roosevelt even though they're smack dab in the middle of Liberty. And we did confirm with the district that is accurate. And again, for Liberty, they have this cutoff region down here that does go to the school as well. So let's talk about your district and what's been going on. So the enrollment as of October 15th, 2016 was 6,616. And you may say to me, well, what's this October 15th date? Well, that's our census day for collecting enrollment in the state of New Jersey. So your district reports their enrollment October 15th, and that's the data we use as being your enrollment for the year. Does it change from day to day? Of course it does. But this is not a moving target. You know, it is a moving target, the enrollment. So we have to pick a day that we're going to compare your enrollment to all the time, and it's always October 15th. In the last 3 years, you've lost 252 students after a period of increasing enrollment. And lastly, we use something called the cohort survivor ratio method to project enrollments 5 years out. It's not a method I developed or anybody else in my field relatively. It's relatively old. It's 70 or 80 years old. And we'll talk about that in one moment. But here's your enrollment. You can see it peaked in 13, 14, 68, 68, but it's been declining a little bit in the last couple of years. So as a demographer, my question is, well, why is that? What's going on? Is it people fleeing the school? Is there a low birth rate? What's going on that causes that drop? And we'll get to that in just a moment. This slide is very telling. This is your historical enrollments by level. So I grouped the elementaries, PK to 5 is the one up in blue. 6 to 8, I grouped Edison with Liberty and Roosevelt. The middle school is red. And the high school is green. So what's interesting about this? Well, first of all, the elementary enrollment was going up, and now it's been going down. What that means to me right off the bat is that eventually your middle school counts are going to start to drop because those smaller cohorts are going to be moving into middle school. At the high school level, which is the green one, it's been pretty stable. But notice what's been going on here at the middle school. It doesn't look like much based on this graph, but this is over 100 students gained in the middle school. So what does that tell me? Well, your high school enrollment is going to go up as well. So I kind of always refer to this little chart here as the window to the future. It kind of tells you if everything's held constant, this is what's going to happen going on in 5 years. So this projection methodology called the cohort survivor ratio method, I'll give you a really simple example of how it works. So what we're trying to do is figure out the rate of progression or survival rate of students from one grade to the next. So if you had 100 students, just a fictitious example, in the 15-16 year in the first grade, they're going to advance into the second grade in 16-17. And let's say there's only 95. We lost 5 students. The survival rate or progression is 95 over 100 or 0.95. If the value is less than 1, you're losing students. If it's more than 1, you're gaining students. So we compute these ratios for all the grade progressions, birth to kindergarten included, through the high school and middle school grades as well. And we do it for not just 1 year. I did it for 10 years. With the idea is I want to see if there's any patterns over time. Are the ratios changing? Are they switching from suddenly under 1 to below 1? And then we use an average of those ratios going forward, projected on your most recent enrollment. So the key thing here is that, two things for you to think about. Number one is that these ratios are, they're going to project enrollment going forward based on your historical enrollments. Your historical enrollments will definitely impact what your future enrollment is based on these ratios. 9 of the 13 were below 1.00 because it's 13 progressions, birth to kindergarten, K to 1, so on and so forth, up to 11 to 12. So 9 were below 1, indicating there's some kind of net outward migration going on. So again, I told you we use averages to project future enrollments. So this is kind of an interesting phenomenon that most districts with declining enrollment have. It's something called negative kindergarten replacement. You actually have positive kindergarten replacement. We'll talk about what that is. It's happened in 8 of the last 9 years, and that magnitude's been declining over time. So what is it? Positive kindergarten replacement is when the number of graduating 12th graders is less than the number of kindergarten students replacing them in the next year. So let me just give you a simple example. If you had 400 seniors leaving and graduating, and they were replaced the following year by 500 kindergarten kids, you would then have a net gain of 100 students coming into the district. So you've been having net gains of this type for 8 of the last 9 years. But most recent year, 16-17 year, was your first year of negative kindergarten replacement. So the tide has turned. So that means that you're not, it's just the reverse. The number of 12th grade students is actually greater than what's coming in the kindergarten. So here's the negative KR I was telling you about. You lost 37 students in 16-17. You had 485 12th graders leave, but only 448 kindergarten students to replace them. So what happens when a district has negative KR? Well, they have to start to balance out enrollment. They have to have inward migration in the other grades to keep everything equal. But you don't have inward migration generally here. You have outward migration, so it's going to exacerbate the problem, if you can see where I'm going with this. So here's a graph showing the kindergarten replacement for the last 8 or 9 years. You can see it's positive way back when you were gaining. But over time, it's starting to trend downward, which means in this region, say right in here, that the kindergarten to 12th grade cohort sizes, class sizes are pretty similar, but now it's starting to reverse where the kindergarten classes are actually smaller. So I compared the kindergarten replacement to the enrollment change from 1 year to the next, the K to 12 enrollment change. Just simply subtract the difference in enrollment, gained or lost for the district. And look what happens here. You can see down here, you lost 66 students in the past year. 37 of it was due to kindergarten replacement. This value here is always more negative than the kindergarten replacement. So you're losing more students due to outward migration in the other grades is what that's telling me. And it's really confirming a lot of the things that I just mentioned. So why is that? Keep going. Peel those layers away from that onion. Birth counts. Here's the number one reason. So births, like I said at the outset, are used to project kindergarten counts. They've been declining here. In 2003, there were nearly 700 births in West Orange. Fast forward to 2014, which was the most recent data we had at the time, 500, plus or minus. So you're talking about a loss of 200 births in about a decade time. That's a big decline. Your fertility rates are a little bit lower than those in Essex County in the state of New Jersey, but women, I don't think that's the problem. It's not your fertility rates and how much is going on. It's other issues. So let's look at another slide that talks about your births. Here's the births right here over time. Here's how many kindergarten kids show up on your door 5 years later. So this is the survival rate from birth to kindergarten. typically in this period, in the mid-2000s, you were capturing about 75% of all births coming into your district and for kindergarten. What does that mean? Well, it means that either a lot of people are moving out from birth to kindergarten, which is not what I suspect. I think a lot are going to private or parochial schools instead. In the last 4 years, however, that's changed. Okay, it's gone up to about 80, 84, 85%. Again, now what's going on? Could it be that more people are moving into West Orange with kids in tow from other communities? Possible. See, that's the problem with these ratios. We don't know exactly what the underlying thing that's causing the increase or decrease to occur. We know the values are increasing, but we can't pinpoint the specific thing that's causing it. So there is your births over time. You can definitely see the downward trend that I was referring to. So because we projected the enrollment at the elementary school level for each one of the elementary schools, we needed to know how many births occurred by elementary zone. And that's not an easy process to do. I'm not going to get into the details of how we do it, but I can just tell you that what's interesting here is that Redwood area, back in 2004, and even here in 2014, has the most births in the district. But what happened, you look at Redwood's decline in the number of births over that period. What's interesting to me is that if you look at 2004, there's really a big variation between births. You have Redwood, St. Cloud, and Kelly up around 100 or more births. And then you got some really low, like Mount Pleasant in the 50s and 60s and Hazel Avenue. Fast forward 10 years later, and these numbers are not that far apart. So they're a lot more uniform. It's not as disparate as it was over 10 years ago. So here's the births by attendance area. The reds and the orange, this is back in 2004, the reds and the oranges are the greatest number of births. So you can see the Redwood area here has the most back in 2004. The colors that are the lighter greens and blues are the least. But look what happens 2014. So look at this nice prettier range of colors. I'm using the same scale for the next slide. So everybody's almost in the same color area, which means that there's a lot of uniformity in the number of births 10 years later. And if we look at the change in births over time, the biggest loser in the area, as I mentioned before, is the Redwood area. That's the blue. They're actually all the districts, I think except for Mount Pleasant, was the only one that actually had a gain over time. But a lot of the zones actually were lower. So another thing we look at is the age pyramid of your community. Age pyramids are simply how many people are males and females in different age classes, whether it be 15 to 19, 20 to 24. They're all in 5-year intervals. So if you look at this is back in 2000. So the orange is the males, and the green are the females. So you can see that the most populated areas, typically for both, are around the 35 to 39 area. And you can imagine that advance it 10 years later, and it should be up in the 40s, right? So here's 2010, and you can see that there's been a gain of more people now in the 40s. This is not, compared to a lot of school districts that I work with, this is actually a pretty good age-sex diagram. What I mean by pretty good, a lot of communities in the state have a gigantic hole right here in the 20s and 30s. Yours is pretty small. I'll just fast forward backward to 2000 and 2010. And the reason that is because in some communities in the state that have very, very high properties values and high taxes, people in their 20s and 30s just can't buy a house there. So you have this dearth of people in that age bracket causing lack of births because there's no women to give birth at that age. This is what New Jersey looks like. Okay, this is a little more filled out in the, you can see compared to yours, but not terribly different. Okay, it's still very, I think it's fairly filled out and good in the 20s. So when I looked at the number of males and females from 2000 to 2010, where are your biggest gainers and where are your biggest losers? I wanted to see that. So if you look at the women, red is the losers, blue are the gainers. The biggest losers in both the males and the females from that 10-year period was the 30 to 34 grouping. That's today's age of when most women are having their kids. And if you look even here at the 25, I don't care about you guys, I'm sorry, males will crush you out for a moment, but 25 to 29 and 35 to 39, right around the females, were also losers. So you're losing people in the ages that women have children. Where you're gaining people? On the other side, you might be a little surprised by this. A lot more people in 55 to 59 for males and 60 to 64 for females. But this was an interesting little discovery. So this is what I was trying to say in the beginning. This is way more than just projecting enrollments. This is looking and finding out what's going on. So let's talk about planned new housing. Because planned new housing definitely can have an impact on a district. So the mayor's office was kind enough to give me this information. So we have the Edison battery storage redevelopment, which is the first thing up here. It's Edison Lofts. It's either going to be the Washington or the Redwood zone for elementary school. 333 apartments. The second phase is going to be 296 townhouses, but that isn't going to probably be finished till about 2025. So in this 5-year projection, and it's probably not going to start for another couple of years, it's not going to have too much of an impact on this round. 27 single-family homes on Colonial Woods, Valley Road near the orange border, 100 market rate and affordable apartments. So if you total that all up, it's about 756 new housing units. An apartment, townhouse, and single-family home does not all yield the same number of kids. And we'll talk about what they yield in your community in just a moment. So this slide talks about planned new housing. This slide talks about potential new housing. Things that have been on the books for a while but have never been developed. Things that can be in litigation. Things where the town council is in discussions and negotiations with developers. So these could happen. They might not happen, but here they are. The Highlands tract is currently approved for 60 single-family homes, but the developer wants to put in 782 rental units. The Redwoods, which is approved for 68 apartments, the developer wants 128. The Valley Road tract, which we just talked about, there's a potential for another 100 units on top of the 100 that are approved. Executive Drive and the Essex Green Shopping Center, not too much details are known about the number and type of units in those particular places. But these are all possibilities. But when I do the projections, I have to go on the prior slide, planned new housing, because it's received approval, and those are ones that are definitely going to be happening. So the projections take into account these housing units that you see behind me, not those. Okay, because this is just anyone's guess. Okay, let's talk about those student yields. This was one of the more complex pieces of the study. We took your 2016-17 enrollment database and joined it to the entire property database of West Orange, and then did analyses by different types of housing, single-family home, apartments, and townhouses. Now, what we found are the values of the number of kids per housing unit, for these different types of housing structures right here. Now, this is not all children. This is just West Orange public school children. So could the yields be higher in these units? Of course, but they're not coming to your school. So I'm only looking at the ones that are actually coming to your school. So we couldn't tease out all 1 and 4 family homes. So it's the way it comes in a database. It's all kind of combined together. But it's roughly around 0.53 children per home. We could tease out for townhouses and condos. It's very small, about 1/10 of a kid per unit. Most of them are 1 and 2 bedrooms. Okay, there's a whole list in the report in the appendix. Apartments, about 2/10 of a kid per housing unit. So based upon these values that you're seeing here, and the number of units, the 756 housing units, we're projecting an additional 150 or so kids from the new housing. And that was embedded into the enrollment projections. You might say, gosh, only 150 kids. But you got to understand is that the majority of the housing type that is being built are multifamily units. Multifamily units do not have big student yields. This is not atypical, what I'm seeing behind me. It might be a little low because I think some kids are going to private schools and parochial, but this is definitely within the realm. So looking at the number of homes that have been built by decade here, you have an older housing stock. Most of the homes were built prior to 1940. You did have a big surge in the 50s. I don't know how much you remember that first picture I showed it to you tonight. I know you're probably glazed over by now. But that first picture showed a lot of growth in the community in the 1950s. That's why, because you had a lot of new housing. Not so much over time. In fact, in the study, I went to the, trying to remember the website, Department of Community Affairs, and collected the number of new residential COs for the last 5 years for your community, about 165, which isn't much for over a 5-year period, roughly 30, 35 or so COs a year, which is not much new housing stock. Home sales, this is kind of interesting. As you know, the number of home sales in the late 2000s with the market crash, the housing market crash, the banking crisis, caused a reduction in home sales statewide. Your community was really no different. About 1,000 home sales in the early part of the decade dropped down to 458. It has been going up, but it's not back to where it was prior to the recession. And usually, in most districts I work with, this increase in home sales leads to a lot of children moving into the community if the families want to move into the school district for the schools. They bring their kids in tow, okay? And that we see in some districts. So here's the enrollment projections. I feel like this is the ta-da moment, you know, everybody wants to know. So what are we really looking at here? So remember we talked about 6,600 or so students is what you have right now. I'm really projecting the enrollment to be fairly stable before declining in that 5th year. So why stable? What's happening is the decline that I'm projecting due to the lower births and the women having loss of women in the 35 to 39 is being offset by some of that new housing that's coming on board. So it's more or less a wash. So if you look at it by the different elementary, middle, and high school, what are we getting? Well, I am projecting a decline in the elementary by over 200 students. That has to do with that lower birth rate. There's nothing you can do about that. That's the changing age structure that I was talking about. You lost 200 births from 2003 to 2014. That's going to catch up to you at some point. It has to. The middle school is declining a little bit because of that dip in the elementary I showed you right at the beginning, the last 3 years. And the high school is going to grow because of that surging middle school population. So even though the community, the whole district might be roughly stable, it doesn't mean that each configuration is static at all. So what we do is a capacity analysis where we compare the number of students in each building, both from the 16-17 current year to what is projected in 21-22. So the capacity in each building right here is not a fixed number. That can change from year to year, and I believe these are older numbers from the long-range facility plan. The way you use a building really changes how your capacity is. If you have a lot of special ed classrooms taking over where general ed used to be, you're going to lower your capacity pretty quickly because you just don't have as many kids in a special ed classroom as a general ed. So how the school district uses a building changes its capacity. This is not a fire code thing where you're not allowed more than 400 people in a specific building. It doesn't work that way. So if you look at this slide, anything in red is showing a shortage of seats right now. Shortage is kind of a funny word. It just means maybe that we have maybe some classes that are more students in there per class than you might be optimal, but it's certainly not detrimental, especially when you have something small like -5 or -6. Blue is a surplus, and you can see the high school has the biggest surplus of seats. So even with the gain that's projected in the high school, it's not going to be a problem. Over time, a lot of these reds turn to blue because of declining enrollment. So that's why you see more blue 5 years out. Okay, this is the last part of the presentation, so I really appreciate all your patience so far. So a lot of this is a 100-page report. I don't know if it's been posted yet, but you get to, you can read it when you're ready to go to bed one night, and you'll be asleep in no time. So I did a lot of maps. Maps are great visual, I don't know how many of you are visual learners, but I think most of us are, and I think that's the nice part about the report is you look at the maps that are in there and you can see changes of different variables over time. So what variables were we looking at over time? First of all, we were comparing data from the 11-12 year to the 16-17 year, a 5-year difference. So we looked at racial percentages by school. We looked at the economically disadvantaged, which are measured by free and reduced lunch. English language learners by school, special ed, student mobility, which I kind of like to change that a little bit to attrition rates, the percentage of students leaving a particular school. The student density by census block. Now, a census block is a tiny little geographical area within the census geographies, and student density is really the number of students per square mile in that block. And the last thing is the student yield by census block group. In other words, how many kids per housing unit are in certain different parts of the community. And you're going to see some interesting things when I get to that map. So I'm only going to show you stuff from 16, 17, otherwise we're going to be here all night. You really could be here all night if I showed you every graph in the report. But this is the enrollment by race right in this current year. The black population is about 39% of the district's population. Right down here, Hispanics are second, and whites are third. Over time, I did write something. The Hispanic population in that 5-year period, the Hispanic population has been increasing. The black and white population actually decreased from the 11-12 year. So this is showing you the white enrollment by school. St. Cloud and Gregory have the largest white population, while Washington has the lowest. So the colors are kind of hard for me to see, at least from this angle, but red would be the highest, and lowest would be dark blue. So you can see the yellows are closer up toward the reds, so St. Cloud and Gregory have a high white population. This is the black enrollment by school. It's actually fairly uniform. The spread between the values are very narrow, so it might look like there's a big difference, but there really isn't. The largest black population is in Redwood and Mount Pleasant. And in case you're wondering what this gray thing is here in the middle, which has no students there, does anybody know what that is? You guys like to do this on a Saturday morning? Golf, yeah, it's the country club. So that big area right there, there's no one going there from golf. So that's the black enrollment by elementary school. This is the Hispanic enrollment by elementary school. Washington and Hazel Avenue have the largest. St. Cloud has the least, which is in dark blue. So red being the largest here, St. Cloud, which is in dark blue, the least. And lastly, this is the Asian enrollment. Asian enrollment's really not that much. It's less than 13, 14, 15%, something like that. That's the most within any particular school. And Mount Pleasant has the highest, Washington the lowest, red again being the highest, dark blue being the lowest. Okay, now we move off of race, look at special ed. Special ed trends in the district. The number in the district receiving special ed has been declining a little bit over time. In the 11-12 year, there was about 1,300 students receiving special ed instruction. In the most recent year, about 1,200. So it's not increasing, it's actually dropped a little bit. But Kelly has the highest percentage of students within the school receiving special ed instruction, in red there, as you can see. Hazel Avenue has the lowest. Economically disadvantaged by school. Now this is where the numbers get really, really disparate. And the way we measure this is, we refer to this as within school percentages. So of the total percentage of the total population in that particular school, what percent are actually receiving free and reduced lunch? Washington is the one, in Hazel Avenue, have the highest poverty rates. Upwards of 80% of kids are receiving free and reduced lunch. And St. Cloud is the lowest. Okay, again, that dark blue telling you up there, that's the lowest. ELL, English Language Learners, there's really not that much of a difference, the percentages between all the schools. Washington does have the highest, as you can see, it's in red up there. But really, if you look at the numbers, it's really hard to see this graph right here, but they're really not that far apart. Okay, attrition rates. The district's attrition rates are roughly about 3 to 4% of students a year, except in the 15-16 year, there was about an attrition rate of about 7.8%. And that happened when the district did a re-registration. And I think some students, said, oh, I better get out if I'm not really a resident. So, but take that out, take out that re-registration. It's about 3 to 4% a year. And really, all the schools, this again, elementary schools, are fairly similar. Kelly has the highest attrition rate. It's about 4%. Not really much of a difference across the board. So these are the last slides. This is the student density by census block. This is where if census blocks are tiny little blocks that make up within the county, within the township. And they're all different sizes. So you would expect that the most students would be in the largest census block. So to control for that, we divide by the block's area. And in this slide, the colors where it's dark blue are the highest densities. That's where you have the most kids per square mile. And it's right along this orange border, right down the strip right there. Okay, maybe a lot of you, you're probably nodding, it makes sense to you. Student yield by census block group. This is the number of students per housing unit. Okay, again, the reds and the oranges are showing the highest number of kids per housing unit. Again, it's along this eastern border right here. So, let's sum it up. Enrollments are projected to be lower at the end of the 5-year projection period, particularly at the elementary level. And a lot of that has to do with the declining birth rate, which has led to fewer children entering kindergarten. The multifamily homes have low student yields, where even though you're going to have new students, it's not enough to overcome the other things that are going in West Orange in terms of your prevailing age structure and declining birth rate. If you had a lot of tracts of single-family homes, perhaps it'd be a different story. But multifamily homes do not really generate a lot of kids, at least particularly from the research that we did in your community. So with that, I turn it over to the board president, and he would like to, or Superintendent Rutsky, how would you like to handle this?
First of all, thank you very much. The public doesn't know this, but we've been looking at this draft for a few months now, and we beat you up pretty badly. But I do have a couple questions. My slides aren't numbered, so for the slide that has school locations,
Yes.
I was just looking at that and noticing, I believe Mr. Rutsky has advised you that we now have a Betty Madalena Early Learning Center, which will be opening next week. So about 70 of our students will be moving into that facility from across the district, and that's not represented here.
Correct. So just to give everyone, the board, the public, an idea, the framework, the time frame when this was completed, I believe we received the contract from the board, maybe it was around Christmas time, maybe January of this current year. So most of the study was completed in the spring. So if there's been changes in terms of decisions to be made where children are being educated in a different location, it would not reflect that. So it's not up to the minute as in August 28, 2017. I would kind of put the brakes on this somewhere probably in early May or even April.
Okay. And for the slide that says birth counts and birth to kindergarten survival ratios, would you say that the birth years between 2008 and 2011 declined? Did that decline, I guess, because of the market decline and loss of jobs, so we had influx of students coming back into the district as parents move their kids out of private schools because they couldn't afford it anymore?
It's possible. It could be, there's a litany of reasons. It's total speculation for me. It could be, people, that could be an economic reason. It could be the reputation of your school district. If there's a greater perception that your district is fantastic, people will come in. So what's the actual reason? The only way we can really get to that data, you'd have to do an entrance and exit interview of every single person that comes and goes in this district. And that's well beyond the scope of this study.
We're working on that. Okay, and for the slide that says the attrition rates. So now for the slide with the map, where the attrition slide for Kelly School, I noticed you said that the attrition percentages are the greatest there, but isn't that because our kids at Kelly School on occasion will be placed out of district because they're learning disabled? Or
No, that's the way we calculate attrition is a code in the student in your database that was provided to me. It actually says exited the district. It's not for going for out of school district. They left. They're gone. You're not paying for them anymore. They totally left.
Okay, that's it for me for now. Mr. Robertson, let's start with you.
Okay. First of all, Mr. Grip, that was the most in-depth scientific study I'm sure our district has ever seen. And thank you for your patience and fielding a lot of questions and a lot of requests from us over the past couple of months. But you really did an excellent job.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Couple of things. In looking at the model that was used, I know it wasn't originally your model, but you had to employ it, the CSR model, the cohort survival rate method. Okay. The cohort survival rate method assumes that what happened in the past is going to happen again in the future.
That's correct.
Okay. And I know it's to provide a linear projection of population. But since that was used, that was key to projecting enrollments. Granted, you did a lot of other detailed analysis of different factors and gave us snapshots of what was affecting demographics, okay? But because that was key to what was used in projecting enrollments, it doesn't include other factors that were not within the scope of your study that can impact demographics, and particularly impact demographics in regard to some of the developments. And first I want to clarify a couple things. In regard to the developments, no numbers are provided in projections for the proposed developments because they're outside of the 5-year, they may be outside of the 5-year range, correct?
That's right. The proposed developments, if they're just proposed, they're not a level of approval, and there's no number of units, we can guess how many kids. I can't even.
Right, because they haven't made final decisions,
Right.
some litigation. Understood. So we don't know what the impact of that could be. Number two, the Edison Phase 2, where you have almost 300 single-family homes. That you're saying is also falling outside of the 5-year limit and does not contribute to the enrollment projections, because you're saying that that's not going to be completed until 2025.
Okay, so the way that works is, again, all this information was kindly provided by the mayor's office.
Absolutely.
And the way it was explained to me, I may not have the exact year right, but we would not expect occupancy perhaps the 2020 year. So if you figure that the study ends around 2021, this particular demographic study, I'm taking about 20% of that development and incorporating it into this study.
So 20% of that development, based
Correct.
upon the timeline.
And again, this is guesstimates. I mean, we're,
Understood. Just want to be clear as to what's impacted the numbers and the guesstimates, because 20% versus 30% versus 40% or 50% can make a huge difference. So, understanding its guesstimates. Some of the factors that the CSR method cannot take into account are what I'll call market attractiveness and regional population or consumer, some of the regional population shifts or recent trends. I'll give an example. And some of this would be qualitative at best and anecdotal, but over the past three and a half years, about 90 to 95% of the residential hearings that we've had were folks who were domiciled in Orange or East Orange, but trying to keep their kids in West Orange schools. Those who exited after re-registration, similar thing. Now, we don't hear this with Verona. They're not domiciled in Verona or Livingston or Montclair. We know that our schools are attractive to some folks living in some areas where the schools are not as highly ranked or not done quite as well. So the market attractiveness when you're building over 700 units, over 1,000 units could impact things, and that's not really part of the CSI. Also, the study, when we look at that market attractiveness, some people may know, some people may not, that under the state Supreme Court ruling, a certain percentage of housing, this includes those that are planned and already on the books, has to be affordable housing. Okay, and so if we already know that that's one of the trends that's not accounted for here, we really don't know what the uptake will be from folks who, if we have good housing that's being sold at a fair market price or good value, and we also have affordable housing. We don't know.
Can I just interrupt you for a moment?
Sure, please.
I just want to make sure, because there's some inconsistencies of what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
When you're referring to the cohort survival ratio method, you're insinuating that there's been no adjustments due to new housing, which is correct. However, I then took this new housing that's proposed and then added in additional students into this beyond what the cohort survival ratio is doing for projections. So there is an adjustment being made for new housing and market attractiveness.
Well, actually, it doesn't address market attractiveness at all. You made adjustments based upon the average numbers.
I'm making
You
the numbers.
used the average numbers, 1 to 4 family homes, 0.53 children contributed per home. Townhouses or condos, 0.11 children contributed. Apartments, 0.21 children contributed. So within the model that you're using, the numbers make a lot of sense. This cannot address without doing research about who moved here and doing actually a survey or something with folks who moved here. Why did you move here? How many kids do you have in the household? And capturing data more specific to those who not only moved here recently, but also doing research to find out what the real market attractiveness would be if we're going to be offering, hundreds of units of affordable housing, hundreds of units and the other thing we don't know is when you flood the market with hundreds of units of single-family homes, and as it is, the number of homes sold per year it's at a decent number now, about 756 thereabouts, but it's declined over the years. So you add more to it, that could actually drop housing prices. So you already have affordable housing. We don't know what's going to happen to housing prices with the addition of single-family homes, and we don't know if what the market attractiveness will be of the apartments for folks who may currently be domiciled in Orange or East Orange, if in fact these units are affordable. That can't be part of this. It wasn't within the scope of the study. So it's not saying that you didn't include what some of the impact would be, but there wasn't a market attractiveness study.
I'm just going to say what you're saying is highly, highly speculative. When one does a study like this, you have to use hard, concrete data, and that's what's been used. We can speculate all we want on the market attractiveness of these developments, but as a demographer, I wouldn't stand behind that.
Right, I wouldn't either. My point is that no research was done specific to the market attractiveness. So yeah, it is speculative, but I'm saying because no research was done on that, and that wasn't part of the scope of your work, you can't really account for that. So you used the numbers that you had at hand, and a lot of that was based upon historical data, not on market changes. Nor did it include things that, once again, anecdotal. When talking to many of the realtors in the area, we've been seeing folks move here from Brooklyn as they got priced out the market. There's no data that's captured any of that. I personally know about a dozen folks with kids who moved here just in the past couple of years from Brooklyn. So my point is, your data, it's great data, it's the best data we have ever had, but there are elements of the study that are not addressed because it wasn't within the scope of the study. And that to me deals with market attractiveness and some of the regional migrations, okay? So it's not knocking what you did. What you did was brilliant, okay? But there are elements that aren't included within that scope. Second, and once again, while you noted that declining birth rates and fertility rates, and birth rates were more important even than the fertility rates, in the slide that's not in the presentation, but and you referenced it, that is in the detailed report, showed that you projected, and understand it's projections, until we have another census, that you've projected, we've seen population increases that were estimated since the 2010 census. And you had for 2015, plus 2.6%, 2020, you're talking plus 1.7%. Year over year, basically, up through the 2040 projections, you have increases in population projected. Now, qualitative again, I'll throw this in here, that there's been no research on that regard. We do know, and granted that some kids will go to private schools, got that, understood that. But if you have year-over-year population increases, and you're adding over 700 units within this amount of time, and actually not really 700, because you only counted 20% of the single-family homes in the Edison project, got that. But with year-over-year population increases, and despite the declining fertility rates, looking at, once again, talking to realtors about who's been moving in, we know from our own town senior citizens that they feel pressured in terms of not being able to age in place because of taxes and other things. So the folks that are moving in, while the chart that you showed had for women who were the primary age, childbearing age, we were in the red, we were in the decline. We see population increases, we see single-family homes and apartments being built in abundance. To me, some of this is not really adding up. We know it's not going to be the senior citizens moving in. It's not going to be empty nesters moving in. People, because of the tax rate, move in because of the attractiveness of the schools and the affordability of the housing combined. So I think that there are just certain factors within this, and while these numbers are excellent, that haven't really been, that can't be captured within the scope of this, and that would be my only caution. I hope your numbers are perfect, because declining elementary school, that would be wonderful. At a point where 3 schools are already overcrowded and others near capacity. But those would be my only comments.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Mr. Schwartzbaum, any questions or comments?
I'd like to really thank you for doing a very comprehensive study that's based upon objective data. I just want to ask a couple of questions. First of all, from the data, from our peak in 2012, 2013 to where we are now, we're down about 200 students, about 3%. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Which is not much.
Not much. So it's very, on an average annual basis, it's pretty much flat. It's the one number that you do point out that I think we need to be cognizant of and monitor is the kindergarten replacement rate, which really seems to be a shocking number to me, based upon birth rates, so on and so forth, that we need to monitor that. And I think that really is a segue into my next point, which is a projection is only a projection. In whether you're statistical or not, it's a guesstimate. And one of the things, and this is really addressing to you, Mark, is that we need to look at the data and say, we don't know whether he's right or wrong.
it's a guesstimate. And I think what we need to do as a board is take the projections on an annual basis and really say, well, are these numbers, how are we versus the projection? And if they tend to be, within some, 5% or more, then really to go back and say, well, why are we off? And the one thing I would ask you to do, and I don't believe you have it in here, is that in your projection enrollment, you incorporate new housing development. If you could break out what the number of students from the new housing developments for the 5 years, which will give us an ability, as we utilize your study over the next 5 years, to go back and say, where were you right, were you wrong, and overall, statistically, do we need to go back and readdress the whole thing? But and which will allow us to do some updates. But I think overall, I guess the one thing that's my takeaway is that your projection is we're really pretty much going to be where we are today with movement, with not a lot of growth.
That's correct.
So therefore, if I had to go to the next step, which is construction of new schools, we need to monitor, but we don't need to go run and build new schools based upon the 5-year projection doesn't seem to indicate that we're going to have a huge capacity issue.
That's correct.
Okay, and when we add in the preschool, we just moved 70 students, or roughly 1% of our population, out to another building. Is that? Do you concur?
I mean, like I said, that part was not part of my study because that happened recently. But what I think needs to be pointed out is those potential housing developments that have been embedded into the projections. If they don't happen, and for whatever reason they're not built, then you're going to be looking, instead of more stable enrollment, you're going to look at a declining enrollment over the next 5 years. So, this is a lot of what ifs, and the what if is I'm assuming that those things are going to be built and they're going to be occupied within the next 5 years.
And that's one of the reasons why I would appreciate if you could at least give us on the enrollment projection how much is just the breakout.
That's easy enough, sure.
I'm sure you have the data.
Yes.
So therefore, we can go back and say, what happens due to the downtown redevelopment? How many students are we getting versus your projection?
It's easy enough.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartzman.
Ms. Mordecai, before we move on, Mr. Grip and I talked about any new developments that come on board, that he can certainly update the document and the projections based on that. So if it's next year, the following year, 3 years, so on, until we get to that point, we're in 4 years, and then we're redoing and looking at this again. So that's something we've already talked about.
Thank you. Mrs. Lau?
Thank you, Dr. Grip. Just a couple of points. First, it's been a long time since I was in graduate school and I took statistics courses, but looking at the sample size for the American Community Survey kind of flips me out because it's 1% annual sample size.
For both of us.
Okay, so I mean, it cannot be all that valid because cumulatively you have a 5% sample over 5 years or 4 years.
The confidence intervals are really wide for a lot of those values. But again, that's all descriptive data. That's not being factored into the projections. It's just really for getting the people in the public and the board to have a rough idea of generally the numbers in the community. I say generally.
Very rough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, I can tell you which values are census data versus ACS. The ACS data would be income and education. The race data and the housing data is census.
Okay.
So it's a split.
Okay, I'm sorry, the education data was...
Education's ACS.
Okay, because you did comment earlier that West Orange had...
It's high.
Yeah, a high
Absolutely.
number.
So it's about 39% for the state, so you're 10 percentage points higher than that.
Okay, I hope that's true. I happened to be on the board in 2008. I know we were, Mrs. Brill is here this evening too, who was on the board at the time. I think Sandy just came on a little later, but we were quite aware that due to the recession at the time, that this district was receiving students who might very well have been a private or parochial school, and obviously your data confirm that, because we were just kind of living through it at the time. It just made perfect sense, because the world blew up as we knew it at the time. But the most interesting aspect of your report for me was it seems that the high school is quite overbuilt. We had extensions put on there in the early 2000s, and right now you are indicating that it currently can house 600 more students, and in 5 years from now it will house still room for 500 more students. Unfortunately, because of education being what it is, I don't think people would ever recommend that we would put 8th graders into the high school, which is unfortunate because that might give us some room to move around. But with your numbers that you're indicating, it appears that we're not really going to have a problem anyway because of major variables contributing to a decline. So just as an FYI, it has nothing to do with you, but as a board member and as a taxpayer, to look to see that the high school had been built to the extent that it had been is problematic.
What year were the additions made?
They were built, I think, completed 4 and 5.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What most people have to understand is that if you compare the population in a community and how its trajectory, it doesn't match up with school districts' population. Schools is more or less like looks like a roller coaster. In the 70s, most districts in the state went through a period of just absolute enrollment boom from the baby boomers. Then the 80s, late 80s went way down, and then 2005 was about the peak enrollment for most districts in the state. So if you see, I have actually a graph of this. It does look like a roller coaster. So the motto, actually the moral of this whole story is that enrollment is very cyclical. So what comes around goes around. If you go through a point of decline, eventually it's going to go back around the other way. And we really think as demographers that the birth rate will finally pick up somewhere in the 2020s because that will be the grandchildren of the baby boomers. So we got a ways to go, but this is the kind of thing that we look at. It's more, we're looking at different things than you would if you were trying to project the population in a community.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Adams. Mr. Charles.
I just have one question, or maybe 2 questions. The trip rate of 3 or 4%, how does that compare to the state and national averages?
That's a great question. I don't have an answer for that because I don't typically compute attrition rates in schools. This was just something I was asked to do for this particular study.
Okay. And then my last comment or question, is it fair to say that through your analysis that the senior population has grown the most in West Orange in the last 5 years or so?
Well, I can't really say for the last 5 years, but that one slide that I showed from the last comparison of 2000 to 2010, we definitely see a large uptick in the 50s and 60s population. So I think that'd be fair to say that those were the largest growing groups in the whole entire age spectrum.
Okay, that's all I have.
And by the way, that's due to 2 factors. One is aging in place, and the second is a lot of developments of 55 plus.
Combination of things, correct, yes.
Also, us baby boomers.
Yeah, and
Right,
the aging in place.
Baby boomers, yeah.
Okay. If we could provide Dr. Grip with a microphone that he could sit out, and we can invite the audience and the public to come up and make comments, either to the board or to Dr. Grip.
I get to sit down.
If any member of the public would like to ask Dr. Grip a question, please come forward, come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record. Mrs. Brill.
Hi, hello. Hi, my name is Amber Newsom. I have 3 children in the district, 2 are special needs. And thank you so much for having this presentation. It was really great. And thank you to the family. So I guess, Mr. Charles, I know you said you don't do attrition for schools normally, But how do we compare to maybe surrounding schools, if you've done any research for them, like Livingston, Verona, Montclair? Like, you said that there's less women in 30s in age range living here. Are they moving to the outer districts, or are they seeing an influx of women in those age ranges? Do you know that answer?
Okay, first of all, let's go back to the attrition rates. I have, literally, you're the first district I've worked with. I've worked with maybe a couple hundred that's asked me to actually look at attrition rate data, so I have nothing to compare to.
Okay.
Let's talk about the 30-something women and where are they? Here's what we're seeing. So the state of New Jersey, the Department of Ed, used to have a rating of all districts in the state by their socioeconomic status. It was called the district factor grouping. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it rates from a low of A up to a J. They don't use this anymore. Most J and I districts, which are the highest in the socioeconomic pyramid, are the ones that are having the greatest decline in the state because they just cannot afford to have anyone move in because of housing prices and taxes. The reverse is being seen at the lower socioeconomic end. I'm going to say it this way, the more diverse the community, the greater the diversity of that community is going to also bring in a lot of people at different socioeconomic levels. And if the housing is more affordable down in the B range of that grouping that I was talking about, they have that increasing enrollment. But I would say that out of every 10 districts I work with right now, I would say 9 are declining. But a lot of them are the high socioeconomic ones. There's some that I'm working with that are down the other end of the spectrum, the Bs and the Cs and the As. They're actually increasing because they're affordable. So I think that can kind of answer your question. It's just people are looking for more affordable places, and they have a balance because you're looking for affordability in a home, but yet you want the best for your child. You want the best education money can buy.
Right.
So people look for that balance.
Okay.
And I understand that as a parent, so yes.
Thank you. I think that my just curiosity is whether we were talking about market attractiveness, or was it really more economic?
Can you rephrase that?
So I was wondering if I guess the CFPs or going to other districts because we thought it was more attractive, or is it because, like you say, it might be economic issues where?
It could be both. So what we're seeing a lot of, I got some nieces and nephews that are they're late 20s. And right now, they're not so interested in buying homes right now. They want to live close to what we call TODs, which are transit-oriented developments. Multifamily units near train station, they get to New York very quickly.
That makes sense.
That's the wave right now. If you look at most development that's going on in the state, it's not detached single family anymore. It's multifamily. It's a new thing that's occurring in terms of the type of housing that's being built. I think that's where a lot of them are going. And then there's the group that never get out of their parents' house and they boomerang back to the basement. So we got those two.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mrs. Newsom.
Hi, Robin Iserlitz, 22 Yale Terrace. Thank you for this presentation. There may be, one of the problems I think, and this has been asked of the board before, is if it's possible to get the slides printed out for the public, because I'm taking pictures, I'm writing down notes, and it's really hard to come up with questions, meaningful questions, when we don't have access to the information. This has been asked before with other presentations, and I'd like the board to consider that. So I'll try to ask a meaningful question. I was curious about this slide about the birth rate by elementary schools. I wasn't sure of the purpose because it's my understanding that these aren't equal areas and they're not equal school sizes. So I didn't know how that was meaningful or how that made sense.
So the whole purpose of why I've got births by elementary zone is because we then compare the births in each one of those zones to kindergarten students 5 years later to compute the survival ratio. So the whole point of this is using that birth data is then going to predict and project how many kindergarten students are going to be in each one of those elementary schools going forward. So we're basically looking at patterns in each one of those schools from birth to kindergarten historically, and then computing an average ratio going forward to project kindergarten in each elementary school.
Okay, and so taking into account the size of the school and the size of the area that's being looked at?
It has nothing to do with area. I mean, we know the birds that have been contained in that zone, but, you know, whether it's a small zone, a big zone, whatever, it doesn't matter. We collected birds by that zone, and it just projects how many kindergarten students 5 years later, based on historicals.
Thank you. And one last question, I guess to both sides. When districts experience this out-migration, you said 252 students have been lost over the last 3 years, do districts tend to follow up with some sort of study as to why those people left? And if so, is this board going to proceed in that way?
Typically not. One district that I worked for, I believe in Westchester County, was more interested in performing an exit interview of everyone that left and why. So that's the only thing really that could potentially be done if you really, some district personnel would, you know, have to find that information out. But that's a possibility.
Okay. Thank you.
Mrs. Brill?
Megan Brill, 1 Oakcrest Road. This is the best geographic study that I've seen us do. Been through 3. One as a board member, one as council president, and a council PTA president. Sorry, Councilman Joe. And I love the KR numbers. Because I've seen it before, I think that it made a little bit more sense to me maybe than the folks that have just really seen those types of numbers, but I really thought it was great. I can't wait to print out the report and send y'all more questions. Mark, I don't understand what you're talking about with the market attractiveness stuff. I think that people have always moved here from Brooklyn. We attract folks from the city. They want to live in, you know, suburbia. They come here. So I don't really understand where you were going with the realtors that you spoke with, told you that people, you know, are moving here from the city, because I think they always have. Laura moved here from the city. I was born and raised here, but that's okay. So I think that I don't really understand how that factors in. I do think that the changes that you've added in, when you're multiplying out the single-family homes versus townhouses versus apartments, that numbers are increases and decreases are built into your numbers, so they're reflective. So whatever market attractiveness we do or don't do hasn't changed over the years, and therefore those numbers shouldn't change very much. The second thing that I think is important is the difference between the single-family homes and townhouses. We're kind of using them interchangeably. He didn't. There's a very big difference between townhouses, which is most of the development that's going to be happening, and single-family homes. So I think that there's a difference there. The third thing that I think is a big impact is the folks that are going to live in phase 1 of the redevelopment are going to be all those people that want to commute into New York and single families, not single families, husband and wives, you know, new Brooklynites coming here. Those are the people that are going to want to buy a house in West Orange and move out of the redevelopment into some of the housing. So that number 5 years from now or 6 years from now is going to be really interesting. The other thing that I think is the problem really for us, and I've been sitting with the redevelopment for a real long time, is the Highlands. That big project that there's a private guy that owns all that land and he wants to put apartments up there, and that I think is really crazy. And I think that is the tipping point that, you know, not that I want to see 50 more single family homes and lots of trees getting taken down, but that I think is something that we all need to be really, really looking at and understanding that that's going to bring kids, apartments are going to bring kids into the Redwood School, Liberty area. So my question that I had was the capacity question. That's why I went really quick. And I remember when we were dealing with capacity, when we built onto all the schools, the thing that we did when we sold off West Orange High School, the prep now, when we sold off that school, our school district, I was in high school at the time, we went from like 8,000 kids to 6,000 kids, projected down to 4,000 kids. We had to get rid of all those schools. what I think we learned when we added on to buildings when we had that increase again, was that now we can close off wings, we can reduce the size of buildings. The high school has all different parts that we could just shut the lights off and close off the air conditioning and not have to worry about it, which is a much better model that I think the whole state is adopting rather than buying buildings and selling off buildings. So within that, middle school capacity threw me because you had something about Roosevelt's numbers were higher than Liberty's, but as I recall, Liberty it was a much bigger school, had about 100 kids more capacity. But I didn't see it that quick than Roosevelt, but I saw that Roosevelt's numbers, and I'm a Roosevelt girl, so I would like to better understand that. And then my other question, if you want to,
I want to talk about capacity,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
Okay.
1 second.
Mrs. Brill,
Is that-
well, just before you say, Mr. Calavano, you never turned the clock on, and while your questions are interesting, Megan, it's not fair to other residents.
okay, I thought we were going back and forth in
So
the
if you could wrap
presentation
up
part.
soon, if you could wrap up.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Beat the clock. The capacity data is from the long-range facility plan, which was dated 2005. So if the buildings are being used differently than they were 12 years ago, and they might be. Well, again, if class sizes are changing, number of kids per teacher, it could be. What a lot of the districts I work with, they have an architectural firm. They'll come in and do a building usage analysis to see if those values are indeed correct. But I just used the most recent one, which was 12 years ago, just so you know.
Okay, so I would like to take a look at those numbers and better understand that. And then the only other number that I didn't see really reflected was our special ed numbers. What we ended up doing when we added on to both Pleasantdale, Redwood, and Gregory was we thought we were accommodating for all those general ed kids that were coming. And what ended up happening was a lot of those classrooms were being used for special ed kids. So instead of 25 kids in the classroom, we had 12. So I don't know now definitely with the moving out of the preschool out of Kelly, we're able to increase some of the general ed numbers within that school. But generally, was there some trend that you saw within the special ed kids coming into our district or leaving the district? And how those numbers would project out? Because that just is a big factor in space and money. So, I don't know if you have...
I really didn't see much trend. I mean, like I said to the outset, is that the number of students was 1,200 in 11-12 district-wide, and it went down to 1,100 in the 16-17 year. It's a drop of 100 students
in special ed.
In special ed. So it hasn't been increasing. Now, if you want to look at it building by building, there could be some variation, but I remember it wasn't that much.
What was it in in elementary, maybe K through 3 or 3 through 5?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you. Actually,
I would like to see
it is in
if
the
there was-
report. If you want to look at by building, it actually shows each building what the change is.
Okay, I like the way that you divided up the birth rates within the St. Cloud area. You took the people that lived in that area and that they would end up sending their kids to that school. So I like that. I understood that. I thought that was great. That's my question. Thanks, Sandy.
Okay, thanks, Mrs. Brill. Mr. Alper.
Hi, Ken Alper, 45 Colmar Terrace. I wanted to say first, I really like seeing that you had some custom numbers for the number of kids that we could expect from each type of unit. Some of us on Facebook were kind of trying to back of the envelope figure it out, and the only numbers we could really find for a source of this were from Rutgers and were 20, maybe 30 years.
2000.
Yeah, they seemed really old at this point. Megan actually stole my question, which was really the source of the capacity numbers, and if they included the fact that we're trying to remove the trailers from the 3 schools that have them. So I know now they're not. So I'm just wondering, I think that we'd heard before there was an architectural study being done. So when those results are in, will those pages be sort of updated so that we can see? Cool. That was it then. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Alper. Does anyone else have questions for Council President Krakowiak?
Thank you. President, I'm dressed in my civilian clothes today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I thought it was an excellent piece of research, and I really appreciate it. Just want to make 2 comments and then ask a question and I'll get out of here. I wanted to reiterate the issue was raised earlier by the speaker about the issue of transparency and actually putting this study up online before the meeting so that everybody could have had a chance. It was an excellent presentation, but as you pointed out about visual learning, there's so much data there, I think it would be very helpful, not only now, but going forward, to put these sort of materials up online before the meeting so that people have an opportunity to see that. There was also a mention of a letter that the mayor wrote that was part of, incorporated into the demography study. That letter, I actually posted it up on Facebook so people can read it. It's an excellent letter talking about upcoming developments, both approved and in the pipeline. So it might be very helpful for people to read it. I just wanted to also point out that the phase 2 of the Edison development downtown, while it is not approved and does not have planning board approval, there are very precise timetables in this agreement for phase 2. Everybody who's been around a while knows the huge amount of delays we had with phase 1. So the phase 2 documentation has very specific timelines of when the redeveloper has to construct and end construction of the projects. Under the agreement that is probably going to be approved later next month, the redeveloper is required to complete the first phase of the phase 2, what we're calling 2A, within as short of time as 3 months. Oh, excuse me, 3 years. I apologize. Like I said, I'm a civilian tonight. And I just wanted to just throw out the numbers that are coming out there. There were 296 units that are in phase 2, and about roughly 2/3 of those are 2-bedroom townhomes. A third of them are 3-bedroom townhomes, and there are also 44 affordable units that are not going to be townhomes, but that would be in a single building. So I don't know whether that's something that the board should take into account. And third, just wanted to ask a question about the data that indicated the outward migration of students out of the schools over the past 5 years. And I wondered if there was, based upon your experience with all kinds of school districts, whether you could say what is the potential cause or causes of that outward migration. It seems unusual to me. And then also, what's the likelihood that that trend could continue? Thank you.
Okay, I'm actually going to address first the second phase of the project that you were just referencing, because the bedroom distribution was provided to me, and as was the affordable unit distribution, so that was taken into consideration when the projections were developed. What are some of the causes of out-migration? Well, a couple things. Number one, it's a lot has to do with the school district itself. If parents are not happy, they will walk with their feet. Number two is economics. If they cannot find work nearby, they leave. Or the cost of housing is just too unaffordable. There's a litany of reasons that can happen. Whether those trends are going to continue, that's really hard, and it's just total conjecture on my part to what's going to be the case. But usually what I see, I'll be honest with you, the number one reason inward migration, that I see inward migration, is definitely the reputation of the school district. Some districts that I work with, they're absolutely beating down the doors, and I see a birth to kindergarten ratio up around 1.3, 1.5. That means you're getting 30 to 50% more people entering kindergarten than were born 5 years prior. So where are those kids coming from? Well, they were born in other communities. They're now 2, 3, 4 years old. The parents bought a house. They want to make sure their kids enroll in kindergarten, and there they go. So that's the number one reason.
Mrs. Krakowiak.
Claire Silvestri, Krakowiak, 20 Grandview Avenue. I wanted to say too, I was really impressed with the presentation, and I'm a statistics wonk, not an expert, but I love to look at data and extrapolate it. And the only question I had, and it was just what you said a moment ago about people moving into the town and into the district with children, school-age children in place, and how that plays in. I think, speaking from when we moved into town in 2003, we had two children who were already elementary school age plus another child, and that was happening a lot. And I think that's where we saw, and then came the financial downturn, and there was a huge migration into the school. Where we live in the Gregory section, and there are bigger homes there. We see that the people who are moving in, there's a lot of churn right now. Probably 50% are young people, young parents with children on the way or infants. But at the same time, there are also people moving in with elementary school-age children. And I just wondered if that was, there was taken into account in terms of where home sales are coming. I would think that that would sort of skew. And then finally, the piece I noticed when you had the little census block, and it showed that there was a much denser population of school-age children along the orange border. And of course, we have a lot of townhouses in town, but they are mostly on the other side of town, whereas the two new developments are on that orange border, and perhaps, there might be, as Ms. Brill said, the hope is that it will be empty nesters and young professionals, but demographically, the people who live in that area tend to have more children going to the school district, and I just wonder if that was taken into account.
The answer is a lot of that is embedded into those survival ratios. So if we see those higher percentage of kids going from birth to kindergarten in particular zones, that's why I did it at the elementary zone level, because it captures each zone individually. So it does get embedded. It might not be specifically something you can see, but the numbers would go up or down because of what's going on at the lower level geography that you mentioned.
Right. So potentially, if there were more people who are like those who live in those neighborhoods in the new development, there is the potential. I know it's not a lot of units, but there is the potential for greater students per unit than 0.2%.
Well,
0.2 student.
Actually, when you get an opportunity to see the report actually does break down the yields by zone. And you will see that they're fairly uniform across the zones. So I actually used the district-wide number because I just think it's too small of a sample in certain zones where they don't have that many townhouses or they don't have that many apartments. So it's better to use a bigger number.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for the demographer? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Dr. Grip.
You're welcome.
For your in-depth presentation, and we look forward to seeing an update when there is one available.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Grip.
You're welcome.
Okay, so our next presentation is a grading profile.
Yes, if we can just ask the board to come back out to the seats in the audience. Mr. Mendez, if you can come up. Mr. Moore, where's Mr. Moore? If you don't mind coming up, please. We're going to talk about a recommendation for grading profile for grades 9 through 12.
This evening we're presenting the grading profile that we're proposing for the 2017-2018 school year at the high school, grades 9 through 12. Mr. Moore will begin by talking to us about the committee work, his advisory committee, and then we'll move into the grading profile.
Well, thank you, Ebony. I don't know if I can follow that demographic study. That's very interesting. But I'll give it a shot. It's nice to be back. I haven't been here all summer. I've been here, but I haven't been here with you all summer. And it's nice to see everyone, familiar faces, and some faces that I know. Simply, this grading profile came about through a principal advisory committee. And what that is we have a committee in which every single teacher from every single discipline, we meet. And we meet in my conference room about every 2 weeks, maybe 3, depending on people can make it. And if there's anything that might come up in the high school for our kids or for the teachers themselves, we'll meet an emergency meeting as well. But within this advisory, and it's exactly that, it's an advisory, it gives a chance for our teachers to have a voice on what goes on with our students, and for them to give me an idea as a principal what they feel is happening for our students, what can benefit our students, and how I can bring that back to, of course, our assistant superintendent or our superintendent to see if there's any adjustments or if there's anything I can do to make things more productive in the high school for both students and teachers. In this advisory committee, we spoke a little bit about the grading policy and what would make it more aligned, because what we discovered through our conversations is we want to be better year after year. And we feel that grading has to be more aligned, more consistent, so that if a student switches from one class to another class, they're not, we will be able to know where they are in the curriculum, we'll be able to know what, they'll know what is expected of them from one class to another. Just, personalities are different, and that might have to be figured out. But at least there's not a guessing game or a treasure map on what the grading policy would look like, and then parents are able to follow that as well. Once we got into that type of conversation, I felt that that conversation needed to be brought to a higher level than myself, and I brought it over to our assistant superintendent, who will talk a little bit about our grading policy. She also, I should say, Miss D. Menendez, sorry, Ebony, I should say Miss D. Menendez, did not just do it on her own. She included myself and Debbie. Debbie, are you here? Can you put your hand up? Debbie Cohen, one of our teachers, who also helped along, who's also on that principal advisory committee, along with 8 or 9 other teachers, and we've sat down and we thought we've come up with what we think would be a comprehensive grading policy and something that would be fair across the board. I don't think it takes autonomy away from each discipline. I think each discipline and supervisor can work their way through the grading policy. As will be explained, I won't steal any thunder. But I just wanted to give you the background so that you know that in West Orange, here in West Orange, whatever the demographics may say, we do a nice job of working together. And I got to thank Ebony and I have to thank Mr. Rutsky for opening their doors to us, especially when we had some concerns and we wanted to do something and improve. And we're always looking to do that in the high school. And I'm happy that we have that kind of support. So Ebony, I hope that's an okay introduction.
Beautiful.
It'll
be all right. You've done a better job.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so then in collaboration with the high school, the teachers also had concern about the quarterlies. There were quarterly exams that are being given at the high school. Some of the concerns expressed were that the quarterlies were implemented at a specific date in time at the end of a marking period, however that the curriculum could be ongoing and more fluid, and that mark or that date in which the quarterly was administered may not very well line up with where they were in the curriculum. So we took a second.
It wasn't a natural break in the curriculum at all times. Quarterlies weren't always a natural break. Sorry.
And so at the same time, we've been developing new curriculum. And in the new curriculum, there are performance-based assessments embedded into the curriculum at the end of every unit. So again, in collaboration, the committee, along with content supervisors and directors, we took a look at the performance-based assessments. We took a look at the quarterlies. We considered the needs in grading for them to be consistent. And here's a proposed grading profile. This really follows the work of Gusky and taking a look at where we consider major understandings and lesson practice and activities. We're suggesting to the board that in the area of unit and course grade level understandings and performance, which are major assessments, that the grades be no less than 70% of a marking period grade. And when we're thinking about lesson practice and activities, it would be no more than 30% of a marking period grade. Within here, teachers would have flexibility. They would work with their content area supervisors and be specific to content to break this down further. This would be the guiding policy. When we consider what does that look like, here are some examples
And again, this is a list of examples, but it's not all-inclusive because our teachers do many more things in their classrooms. But this would give us an idea of what the bigger stuff is versus the smaller stuff, as Gusky would put it. In the no less than 70%, in the understanding and performance, we would have things like summative assessments, essays, works of art, visual representations, models, and these are examples across the content areas. Again, it's the bigger assessments, large projects, things that really require students to demonstrate proficiency over time. It's the bulk of their work. It's where they're working toward as it relates to the standards. On the other end, you have lesson practice and activities, and this is really thinking about independent work, guided practice, checks for understanding. It's our classwork, it's our group work, it's our small, our journal entries, it's our questions, our discussions. It's the things that are taking place in class. So there's the 70%, the larger major assessments, really measuring student independence and their grasp of understanding of the content, and then in the lesson practice and activities, it's the smaller work. If you see here, we do break out further in the major side. We do have performance-based tasks, and that's what Mr. Moore spoke about earlier. If the performance-based tasks replace quarterlies, which teachers are looking to remove quarterlies from the...
Can I just say something? Now, what we want you to think about is what kind of authentic experience the student's having. So the performance-based assessments are embedded into their lessons, so there's no trick to it, there's no treasure chest. Students are working right within their classroom, they'll be assessed on the things that they're looking at, and what we're trying to promote is that extra thinking, that higher order thinking, where students can take that concept that they learned and synthesize that, make it into exactly, you know, maybe make it into a real world experience or some type of experience in which they own learning the concept or the lesson, so that we make sure they leave our classrooms not in the old rote way of maybe recall, or you remember it for the 10 minutes that you take the test and then you forget it once you leave the classroom. We want to try to give them an authentic experience where they remember it or they experience it. It's kind of like what Laura, you were saying today about statistics. You remembered that from that class. Something hooked you and you remembered it. Well, in every lesson that we're trying to promote, we're trying to get the kids to move to that level of thinking where they're doing that I like to call extra thinking. Higher order thinking is probably more commonly used.
And so in every unit, at the end of every unit in the curriculum, then we will find a performance-based assessment that the students are working toward the entire unit. They know what the performance-based task will be. They know what the rubric will be. It will directly measure the understanding of the students as identified in the curriculum. And so we're saying with this grading profile that performance-based tasks will account for 15% of that 70% grade. The other major assessments, tests as we know them, would be the 55%. On the lesson practice side, we're saying classwork, activities, etc. would be the 20%, and homework could not account for more than 10%. And when we say homework, we're talking about independent practice. It's what the student goes home to do independently and practice. It is not what a student may do over time that might contribute to a big lab project. That would be on the bigger stuff side, right? It's just that quick independent practice, and we're saying that shouldn't be more than 10%. A student shouldn't be able to fail a course because he doesn't do his homework, and the opposite way, right? That the grade shouldn't be because he did all of his homework and he has a 90. Correct. That it has to really be able to measure what the student can do independently in an authentic task, as Mr. Moore said, in a new situation, and as it relates to application, real life setting, and across the content. We did differentiate this for honors and advanced placement. So again, if the board approves the policy of 70 and 30, honors would fit within that policy, and they're asking for 80% and 20% because that is a more rigorous expectation, and so it's appropriate. In the honors class then, you would see the performance-based tasks would be weighted at 20%, major products at 60%, and on the other side, independent, between 10 and 20%, and independent practice homework not to exceed, again, the 10%. And that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Mendez. Thank you, Principal Moore. This has been a pet peeve of mine for several years, even though my sons are out of the high school now. I remember asking this very question when they were in school. I'm going to start with my colleague, Mr. Charles. Any questions or comments?
Just one question, or two questions and a quick comment. We're looking to implement this for September.
Yes.
Okay. Also, I guess, to Principal Moore, how frequent does the advisory committee meet? And does it meet on all different topics? Because I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's very important that we get the feedback.
Mr. Charles, just come up to the microphone. I'm sorry.
I want to
I
hear.
don't know if you were saying Ebony.
No, you can stay in the. You can stay in the
No,
audience.
we want to hear from you.
Mr. Charles, we try to meet, we're ambitious with 2 weeks, but that's ambitious. Definitely within 3. Deb, would I be correct? Definitely within 3 weeks. And there's a consistency to it. I do want to still meet, even if we don't have a major topic to discuss, because I think that the relationships develop there, and I also need to hear small and little things that go on. Keeps me kind of abreast with everything that I don't see. So we try to meet every 3 would probably be the more honest answer, but 2, we try to be ambitious.
I think it's a wonderful idea. I think it's very important to get the impact suggestions from the teachers and the frontline people too. It's important. So.
Thank you.
That's all I have, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. Mrs. Lau?
Hello, thank you. What is an exit ticket?
Okay. At the end of a lesson, teachers would normally review what happened during that entire lesson. We went over this, we went over that. But the exit ticket, we asked the student to tell us, what did you get from that lesson? And instead of, although you might go some type of summary in a review, you're looking for some specific, because the exit ticket, the purpose of that we use our exit ticket is so that our teachers can go home, or maybe once that class leaves, able to read how many kids actually grasp the concept the objective they were trying to get across, or where their kids are, and they're able to measure. I know we have some new things coming in that'll give us a little more immediate feedback, like mapping and so forth, but for now, we use the exit ticket because it gives us a little bit of an assessment, immediate feedback of where the kid is in the class at the present time.
Okay, thank you. I had no idea when I saw that. I don't remember exit tickets from school.
No, some stuff we threw in.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Assuming the board passes this evening and school is opening next week, how quickly are you going to be able to insert this into the handbook? No pressure, but...
Well, I can always do an addendum and put it online. We're prepared to be able to do this right away because we worked on it last year. We were working on it before we got to you, and even before we got to Ebony, God, Ebony, what's going on? Even before we got to Ebony, you're making me nervous. Even before we got to Ebony, we wanted to have some type of skeleton or framework so that we don't bring you something that you can't really look at and make moves or look at. So we're prepared because it's been a good long year.
Well, I guess my concern was not necessarily for our benefit, but for the students' benefit.
Oh, sorry.
Because the handbook is all about what
no,
they
and the
can
students.
and cannot
Oh,
do.
absolutely. And the students.
Well, Debbie's got it. Breaking news.
Hi, sorry. No, we talked about this in June. Teachers have already made their syllabuses.
Okay.
With this, kind of assuming that it was going to be approved. So we have the old ones and the new ones, so it's prepared to go out. We're all prepared to talk about it at back to school night. The handbook's been printed, so it would have to be an online letter to the parents as far as that's concerned. But the teachers are all prepared. I've actually been texting, has this been approved? Are we good to go? Can I finalize? And give me 24 hours and I'll get back to you. So teachers are prepared for it to be implemented.
And I feel for the students, like I said, I used the word treasure chest because I think a lot of students didn't even know how they were assessed, to be honest with you, because students don't look at their syllabuses all the time and so forth. But this gives them a clear picture. Hey, you need to get this done. Maybe they'll figure out homework's 10%. I might skip a homework or two. Am I saying this on TV? This is probably not a good idea. Dad, don't erase that or cut me out. Do your homework. But I just realized I'm saying this on TV. But what I'm saying, but there's no, I know, there's no, so let me tell you, there's no guessing game to this. No, students know exactly where their grades are coming from, what kind of effort they have to put in, and so forth. Please scratch my last comment.
And for consistency, should the board approve the profile, then we will work with Power School to unify the grade books for the 70-30 that way, that when teachers set up their grade books, they're setting it up within the 70-30 structure.
Well, I'm glad the rubric will be consistent then throughout the departments. That's critical. Obviously, teachers need some latitude in their day-to-day stuff, but you do need to set parameters as to what your expectations are as the administrators. But just to reiterate Mr. Charles's comment, we hear about top-down, but bottom-up is really a cool thing too. So I'm really glad that the teachers were involved and brought this to you, Mr. Moore, and then further up to the administration and to the board, because they are the front lines, and this is, critical as to what they're seeing to implement. So thank you for listening and bringing it to us.
No, thanks. That's good.
Thank you, Mrs. Lau.
And I just want you to say the assistant superintendent's name one more time.
Anthony D. Menendez. Menendez. That's so wrong. That's so wrong.
Thank you. Mr. Schwartzbaum, any questions or comments?
First, I'm very happy that there will be consistency through it. I think it's very important. This a quick question. So, by department, will there be consistency? So let's say by math. So math, where math is much more exams, less projects, models, so on and so forth. So will all the math classes throughout have the same percentages versus, let's say, language arts or English?
They began meeting in June to consider what those breakouts would be. The teachers definitely expressed one concern about being able to have latitude, and so then we heard that loud and clear. So they still want their latitude, and so then we don't want to define it as a policy for them, except for the 70-30. We want them to be able to, within the content area, say in math, this would be the breakdown. In science, this would be the breakdown. So they will work with their supervisors in September, should this be approved again, to define those, and we need to make sure that the teachers have that. Another concern would be, or a question, how are we going to deal with the modifications for our special needs students or our ELL students? That's another concern they brought to our attention, and so then we'll work with them through that. So there's still things to work out with the individual pieces, but the policy would guide that work.
And subject matters such as math, in English there's different algebra, calculus, and so each of those teachers have to work together to come up with a consistent policy. So let's say that your son transfers from this class maybe to that class. It won't be so strange, and it'll be consistent, and that's what we're looking to do.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartzman. Mr. Robertson?
I just want to really applaud the job that you did, Mr. Moore, Mr. Mendez, Ms. Cohen, and the fact that you really included the teachers and all their input as they are on the front lines, and the advisory committee is a great idea. Having a consistent rubric for the grading profile, this is a big step forward, and it's something that, frankly, I hope we're going to rapidly take the same steps with elementary and middle school, because ironically, the high school has actually been a consistent leader in showing measurable improvements and gains over the years, and where we've had the biggest issues, which came up with the honors, was that we did not have it was felt that we didn't have a consistent rubric for elementary and middle school, so I hope that they'll quickly follow suit. So you really set a good standard here. A number of things that I really like about this. One is it's going to help in matching up the curriculum pacing with the assessment testing, so that you don't have these random quarterlies that, while they may have a certain, all come during a certain time period, but they don't necessarily align. Two, everyone's going to be playing off the same playbook. Teachers will still have freedom of creativity within this framework, and that's great. Teachers need to be able to have that creativity, but the playbook in general is still well outlined. The idea of really focusing on an authentic experience and promoting higher order thinking, having the performance-based test embedded, all great. And also, in doing this, you're really the first to start to address what we mean by homework. That has been a failure to define the role of homework, how much homework, not confusing quantity with quality, and where homework as practice versus a continuation of a larger project or greater thinking at home. You're the first to do this. So you've also set a good standard there. One thing, and you mentioned you're going to address how it's weighted, how it can be customized for special ed.
Yeah.
Okay, because that's critical. One thing, I'm sorry?
And ELL.
And ELL,
Yeah.
absolutely. One thing I was wondering as I looked at the lessons and practice activities, the understanding performance, I know that overall we're focusing much more on the authentic experience. We're focusing much more on things that are interactive, that are engaging. I also know that a reality at the college level is that while we're trying not to lecture to kids, is that when they go to, I don't care what college it is, whether it's Harvard, whether it's Seton Hall, for many of their classes, because the professors are focused on publishing, and they're not always, some are great teachers, some are not, but they're often lecturing. Somewhere in the equation we lost the ability to take notes. There was a time when we were actually teaching the Cornell note-taking method. And I see notebooks and journals, but I'm not clear, are we teaching the kids a methodology within this so they can properly capture, whether it's the Cornell method or another method, how to properly and effectively take notes, which helps to actually pull these elements together.
Well, we never lost Cornell note-taking. We still have that, and we do use it with students. Now, as far as notes, notebook checks are done in certain classes. They do checks because they use that as some of their grading, so we do have notebooks. If you notice notebooks on there, because people do check notes.
Okay.
Now, can I say to you that people now, I will tell you lecturing is always going to be. That always is a part, because you start every lesson sort of with some type of lecture. So lecture's there. That doesn't really leave. Now, as far as like saying, do we have, I can't say that every class across the board will do a notebook check, but we do have a number of classes that do, and programs that specifically check students' notes in organization, like our AVID program, we call it Collegiate Institute, because, but besides them, there are classes that do notebook checks, especially freshman seminar does it, then you have, their freshman year they do it, and then you have classes that you take specifically, whether it's a history class or something where some teachers do that. I cannot tell you that that's across the board consistently that people will continue to, or do continue, let's say continue to check notebooks at that, but we do have notebooks and where people take lessons and take notes in a certain way. Now I believe we're moving to Chromebooks or so forth.
Right.
Doing most of it.
Yeah.
That will be another way, which we're going to PD on first, but I think that's going to be another way in which will answer some of what you're saying, because we would have to figure out how to do that with students using the Chromebook.
Yeah.
So, we're embarking on some of what you're talking about. However, please don't think that lectures are out, because lectures are just part of the pedagogy. It is there. It's never gone. So
fair
that
enough,
starts
absolutely.
Okay.
And also the profile will allow us to open up avenues for these professional dialogues to really consider how we assess and what we're requiring students to do, and how does that make up a grade or not.
Okay, excellent. I just want to take a moment too, with this as well as with all of our presentations, it was mentioned by Mrs. Iserlis and others. It would be great to have these things, these elements when we're actually first doing, posting the agenda, to post all the presentations online, so parents, and we have parents who are teachers out there, as well can really digest the materials and come back to us with more critical questions and thinking. But I just want to thank you. Job well done, and you've laid the path for the others to follow.
Along with a group of people, but thank you.
Yes.
Not just me. But
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Robertson.
Ebony.
Wait 1 second, I have a comment. Okay. Thank you. I let my colleagues
Working
go.
my way.
No, I generally let my colleagues go first. I really like the presentation, and I just want to confirm, now with this at 70-30 and 80-20, this will ensure that these are true grades, because I know from time to time you see the statistics that when students go on to college, they're not fully prepared, but they have a 3.5 or a 4.0, and then it turns out that that 4.0 is not a true 4.0 because a significant portion of the grade is homework or some other project-based learning that's not articulated vertically to the college curriculum.
I think this is the beginning to us closing that gap. I think it's going to take time. We have to define, as you collectively have said in your comments, what homework is. We have to collectively define as a unit what are these larger assessments and these smaller classroom activities. We want to set parameters for the 70-30 as a policy to begin to close that gap, while at the same time allowing the teacher to really know their students and assess their students and use their grade book as they see fit. So I think we're trying to strike that balance, and we're going to have to walk it out this year and then get some feedback and see what it looks like. But I think it's walking toward that end of closing the gap and having a more consistent show of what grades are in comparison to what independent assessments look like. So there's no reason why we should, as an example we gave earlier, let's say have 90% of the students having an A in an algebra course and only 30% on a park passing, right? That's a very big gap. So we just need to close that gap, and I think this is a step toward.
And if you recall, we were talking about the authentic experiences because, we'll go along with our mission statement here. We're trying to promote lifelong learners. I don't want kids to go to college and not excel. They come from West Orange. I want that for them. I want to make sure of it. But the only way we can assure that is if we make sure that they walk out of that lesson, whatever that is, or with that experience and that higher order thinking, they're able to take that experience and make it their own. And that's what we're trying to do here. That's the goal. And that's why we moved to performance-based, assessment. That's why we're really focused, because we want students to walk away with the same type of, like what I heard from Laura today. Yeah, that she could recall that in this moment. Well, they should be able to do that.
I still remember my Merchant of Venice soliloquies.
Well.
Absolutely. So I totally understand.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying the notebook comment, because I have one of each. You had to check one of my son's notebooks every day, and the other one was totally independent. I could trust that his notebook was up to date.
Yeah.
So thank you for all your hard work.
Just one last question. You mentioned park a couple times and aligning how, a student may be making an A but not doing as well in park. Are we using park as a major measure in terms of, as one, I know you're not using it as the major measure, so I'm not going to, I don't want to say that, but as a major measure in terms of determining how the grading profile and performance align with with performance in the park or other testing?
I think we're using it as an example of a student's ability to apply understanding independently in a setting that may be different, that may ask the question about the content differently than they asked it in the classroom, right? So when we teach in our classroom, we can teach skills and content, but if we don't teach students how to, the understanding of how to apply that content in a new, authentic situation independently, then when they walk away from the classroom, are they still able to answer the question? Are they still able to perform? Are they still able to complete or meet the standard? And so then any assessment, any real life experience, can we now transfer what we learned in our classroom to a new, authentic situation independently, making those connections ourselves as students? And that's what we'd like to really focus on, independence.
Okay, thank you.
I
think next year, Mr. Robertson, we need to pay attention that we may not be talking about a new state test. Park may not be around at this
That's
time
what I
next
was-
year,
yeah,
so
yeah,
we'll
that's-
deal with that when we get to that bridge.
There you go.
Yes. Okay,
Thank
Ms.
you,
Moore,
Mr.
I'm going to move on. Thank you, Mr.
May-
Mendez, Mr. Moore.
Mr. Rutsky, if I may interrupt? Since we have our administrators and faculty and staff here, I don't know if you want to skip the agenda so that we, if they would like to make statements and go home, but I believe some of the members of the audience may have questions for the grading policy. We didn't open it up
Sure,
for questions.
that's fine. Mr. Mendez, can you just come back up to the front? And Mr. Moore, just have a seat in the front. You can share, the portable mic.
Okay.
If I can just have you guys over here just because of the speaker.
Sure.
Over here.
I'm sorry,
On the
Mr.
other
Moore,
side.
summer's
Just
over.
because of the speaker.
Right.
Yes.
Hi, I will try to make this brief. Amber Newsom, 18 Auburn Road. I have 3 kids in elementary school, and as I think about if to place them in the high school, because overall I've looked online and the high school isn't rated very high, and I wondered about it, so thank you so much for making these improvements. However, as I'm also a math and finance major in the graduate school of Columbia, so when you say you're putting less emphasis on homework, it kind of makes me worried. When I'm thinking, what made you decide the 10% or 20%, 80% ratio? Like, why is it reflective on less intensity of the homework, or is less time for the homework, or because I'm sure when you get to college, I mean, yes, you're lectured to, and a lot of it is independent. You have to be able to do the stuff on your own, and you have to perform when you come to class to take the exam.
I think there are many views we can really consider when thinking about homework. When we think about it as practice, right? So this is what we've accomplished today in our class, and you're going to go home and just practice a set skill or something that we've done in class. We want to consider that. We want that to be a valuable experience. We don't want it to be 80% or 50% of a grade. What we want to be a part of that grade is what they're able to do or how they're able to apply what they've practiced to a new and authentic situation that may be more elaborate or that may require them to demonstrate various skills put together, understanding, right? Again, there are other considerations when we're thinking about homework and independent practice for students who may not have support, or students who may work, or for students who statistically or economically disadvantaged. There's a whole set of research there that also has us to consider homework from a zero perspective, not valuing homework, but when kids don't do homework, do we give them all zeros? Mathematically, how do they come back from a 0 in an average, right?
Right.
So mathematically, so you know, right?
But I'm just saying that can be a deterrent from college preparedness, because that's not how it actually is.
So I think we can combine and we can walk along both the independent practice plus those lab experiences or those other things that students are being asked to do at home that contribute to a larger project without students, in some cases, failing because of homework, right? We don't want
Right.
that to be the pattern.
Right.
We don't want them to fail because of homework.
Right.
That's what we're after. It's not that homework is not valuable. It's not that homework is not right, and it's still graded, absolutely. But we want it to be, as someone said, quality homework, right? Quality practice, not the skill drill and let me give you 100 math problems, because that's not valuable either, right? So we're going to continue to have those discussions, define what independent practice is, define the value of homework, and just make sure that we're really measuring independence and really measuring a student's ability to apply understanding versus a student who's failing because they didn't do homework.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
That's just Brooke.
Megan Bro, oh gosh, 1 Crest Road. I love the 70-30 split, and I love the consistency between honors math 9, honors other teacher math 9. That if there is situations where you do have to move a kid, they're not that far behind, or if they need to be more challenged and can move up, you at least know where they are. So mapping that curriculum consistently, I think, is really important. I never really liked the quarterly model. I know when we went to it, why we went to it, but I still think that there's something to be said for that comprehensive, half the year assessment and then the end of the year assessment. So how will quarterlies figure into our grades at the end? Is it going to be 5 grades that get shared over to get your grade point average, or is it just the end of the 4 semesters, the 4 quarters? And I didn't understand the exit ticket. Like, I guess it's a written...
It's a slip. It's just a written slip in which you as a student will independently jot down what you received, what did you get from the lesson today, and usually the teacher would ask a question at the top of the exit ticket, and the student would try to answer that within the exit ticket, but we try to get a little bit of a narrative from the student so we can hear from the student themselves.
Okay.
And it's just a slip. It'd be like me handing you a slip right now and then taking it back at the end. You only leave the student maybe about 5 to 10 minutes to write on it. It's a short excerpt about maybe telling us a little bit
about what kids have seen. The only other thing, I agree with, I didn't catch your name, but when you talked about homework, I like homework just because I know what they're actually doing and can help maneuver, what's going to happen the next day. But I do understand that a 0 in that homework column of the kid that is too busy to get to it, doesn't have parents at home that are helping them, a whole host of reasons that a 0 on dumb homework is a challenge to overcome, and it does kill your GPA. So,
but Megan, just understand, we still give homework. We're not away from home. We want homework. We're just telling you that we're trying to preserve their grade, and we're just placing the onus on performance within a classroom that you can measure and see. And not homework, you take it home, someone could do it for you, you bring it back. That's homework at times. But homework it's important. I'm not saying, don't think that's not important. It is important. But what we're saying to you is, I don't want a student to fail a course because they didn't bring on homework, and then they can pass a test, and that they still failed the course because you didn't do your homework. You know what I mean? So homework's important. It's just, we're just saying it's 10% of the grade is what we're asking.
Right, and even 10% is going to equate to a half
You're
an
not
hour.
getting an A if you don't do it right, you don't do it.
But a half an hour in every class is still 3 hours of homework, and it could be more. So I think that both sounds really good.
Thank you, Mrs. Brett. Mrs. White?
Hi, Sandra White, 16 Funders Road. My question is about, our son is an athlete, so the ASAP, we talked about that earlier. Is there a timeline? Because some teachers don't put the stuff in, they wait till last to put everything in. So halfway through that course, there's not enough grades in there, and so I was wondering if there's a timeline that's going associated with this as well.
Associated with the grading policy itself?
Yeah, I mean, because you saying everyone's going to, with the rubric, so is there a time that they have to put the grades in? This 10th grade, they only put in 3, but they have other grades they didn't put in. So when ASAP rolls around, they're pulled off their football field, and I'm not going to be happy.
So for all the parents who don't know what ASAP is.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All right, I'll do that real quick. We require our athletes to receive grades of C and above, and overall GPA of C and above, in order for them to participate in athletics. And the question is about when is that timeline, because what happens is sometimes if an athlete fails something or so forth, and it runs into the time in which ASAP is checked, which I know what you're thinking, because we check it all the time, sometimes that athlete might be set on what we call a probationary period, where they must see the teacher and the teacher has to sign off, and they must show improvement before they can return back onto the field. And what our parent, Ms. White, is saying is that without knowing a specific timeline, maybe my kid will do good in the next assignment, which will be next week, and that grade didn't go in yet, so now he's off not getting a chance to play until that goes in. I would like to say every 2 weeks you should know what goes on with the grades, but I will tell you this with ASAP so that you know. If you run into that as parents with athletes, where your your child's grade drops for a moment, you can still make a phone call, we can still talk. We will talk to the teacher, we will take a look at the grade ourselves and make sure, and we will issue back we will allow the student back on once we know. So nothing is final, but we do set these parameters in place because these parameters are important for us to not only just improve as a school, but to give the kids a chance. Students with a lot of talent, such as your son, has a chance to go beyond this point. I want the kids to see beyond Mr. Moore, beyond these walls. They have to know what's going on, and they have to be prepared, and we need those prodigious numbers. So we push it a little bit. And yeah, we do follow it, and you're right, we're strict on it. But we are not so tight that we wouldn't look at it if you bring it to our attention. So I would say if you don't see it within the 2 weeks, and you run into something, bring it to our attention. Okay. All right, and we'll be happy to address it.
I think everything else was answered. Because the syllabus, you said that it's going to reflect in the syllabus?
Yeah.
And we can get those online?
Each
like
teacher.
In this presentation, yeah.
Well, you were talking about this one that you want?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Anything that's approved by the board will be posted. So then, if it's approved, then it would be posted. As far as syllabus, then the teachers, I believe they distribute those to the students and to the parents at the beginning of the year.
Mrs. Mendez, also if this could be translated into Spanish for
Sure.
learners before it's posted. Thank you.
Sin problema.
Muchas gracias. Okay. Mr. Rutsky.
Thank you. Several things I'm going to go through quickly. They won't take a lot of time. Opening of school. Everybody's been working very hard to make sure the schools are ready to go. We know that. Thank you, Mr. Moore.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mendez. The opening of school is a week from this Wednesday, the 6th, the first day for students. Staff returns on the 5th. All of the teacher assignments, schedules, etc. have been mailed out. The elementary went out at the end of last week, so if you have not received your letter, hang in there. I know that there's certain parts of the town that it takes a little longer than others. We've experienced that, so hang in. And if there's any questions whatsoever about anything in the letter, any help you need, please reach out to the principal. They are working, they are here. You can call the main office if you need something. And remember that if you don't get a response in email, please call the office, and they'll help you with anything you need. The busing passes went out as well. They are out to all of our parents. We also have the special education. They're working, finalizing everything with our special education, transportation. That will, any issues you have whatsoever with busing, please speak to the director, Elaine McFarland. Any way we can help, don't hesitate to contact us on that as well. The other really nice thing I want to talk about, and I know Ms. Mordecai has been doing this for several years with donations of backpacks. We received a donation on Friday. We got a call on Friday, and we had 250 backpacks donated to us. The question they had for us is, can you pick them up in 3 hours? And I said, we will find a way to do that for 250 backpacks. So we're going to break those up across the schools and have them available for the principals, assistant principals, counselors, etc., to give out to students, not only at the beginning of the year, but through the year as well. If something would happen, we will have them in the buildings and be able to assist families and students in particular on the opening of school. I want to give an update on the special education audit. We are coming to the end of the audit. There's some things that are going to happen in the next few weeks. In particular, we have the parent meeting where you can provide feedback to the auditors. There will be 3 of them at Liberty Middle School on the 13th of September. And it is a forum that starts at 7 o'clock. There will also be the opportunity for some individuals to have individual interviews with those same auditors, and they will reach out, they will contact those parents who have asked for that kind of thing. Obviously, we're going to try to accommodate our CPAC group, some of our leadership in that CPAC group, as well. But we are going to also send a note home on the first day of school reminding parents who have not taken the survey to, if they're interested, to please do so. Right now we have 200, as of this afternoon, 253 parents who have gone on and taken the survey, provided the feedback. So we're excited about that. We hope that doubles or triples. So we're going to try to promote that with all the students, all the schools on that first day, and then it'll be open for a week to finish up. And it's been open all summer long, and we know that people have been away, so we want to make sure that we give parents the opportunity on that first day to go ahead and take a couple of days. It takes about 20 minutes to complete it. If all the staff members as well on the first day of school, on the 5th, when they return, they will be providing feedback to the auditors. So on our first day on September 5th, the child study team members will have the opportunity to speak face-to-face and then take the survey. So will our guidance counselors and each of our leveled special ed teachers, our elementary, middle, and high school teachers, as well as all the paraprofessionals. So it's scheduled for an hour on that first day, and we're looking for that feedback. Those are really key individuals who know a lot about the special services department and ways that we can improve that department and the overall experience for our students and our families.
Excuse me, Mr. Rutsky. When is the survey open and closed?
It's open now, but we're going to remind everybody on the first day of school. We're going to send something home on the first day of school, and then it'll be open for a week after that. Okay. Preschool and special services update. I am very proud, very happy to be recommending that our new principal of the preschool is Connie Salambino, and that moving into the acting director for our special services will be Kristen Gogarty. Both of them are going to be very successful in their roles, and one of the most important things that we need to do is to find everybody's strength and let them capitalize on those strengths. And with our current director, Connie Salambino, moving to that principal role, we are very happy that the first experience they're going to have is somebody who knows early learning center, developmental, and the ability to really create an early learning center that will allow our students to come out of the 3rd and 3-year-old and 4-year-old program really well prepared for kindergarten. And Dr. Polaire is here right now, and obviously this is near and dear to her heart because she has had the preschool program in Kelly for a very long time. She has been tremendous in helping with the transition and speaking to parents, along with Ms. Gogarty and Ms. Salambino, myself, and really helping them with questions they have about the move from Kelly. We've had to make a couple of adjustments that really put a couple of parents in a situation for transportation. So being that they were thinking it was going to be at Kelly, and we moved it to our new location, which again is going to be called, if you haven't heard, the Betty Madalena Early Learning Center. It was suggested from Ms. Lab that that would be a nice way to honor Betty, and we spoke to the other board members. They agreed with that, and then obviously put that out, and there's a lot of people who have worked with Betty and very honored to do that. So there's a lot of work that's happening with our preschool, and we have an open house Wednesday night for our parents who have their children attending that. Our teachers are working every day to get their rooms ready. Ms. Salambino's down there. We were down there all day today making sure that things are moving in the direction they need to move and getting signs in place, and there's a lot of things that need to happen. But we will be ready next Wednesday when the students walk in there. The transportation is in place for our students, and then we're going to have an open house we're going to have a recognition of the new facility actually on Betty's birthday, which is October 9th. So there'll be a lot of individuals invited to that, and a lot of different things that will be happening, which will be coming out very soon for that. But we're very excited for the preschool. One of the things that you heard tonight was the overcrowding at Redwood, the overcrowding at Gregory, and it has allowed us, by moving the preschool out, to really improve our LLD program by having those students in Kelly and having the consistency and the ability to work together with all of our LLDs. So they'll be moving out 3 out of Gregory and 2 out of Redwood into Kelly. And again, very special thanks to a lot of individuals, Dr. Polera and Ms. Gogarty and Ms. Alambino, for helping with that transition. The principals and the assistant principals in both Gregory and Redwood have been instrumental as well, because parents obviously are concerned, especially our 5th grade parents right now thinking they were going to be in Redwood, and now we're going to be moving the program to Kelly. So we've worked with them, helping them, and we certainly are very sensitive to the parents and their concerns about needing to move. So we're trying to do everything possible to help with that transition. We are having an open house on Thursday night over at Kelly for our LLD parents moving from Redwood and Gregory, and they'll get a chance to meet Dr. Polera and see the facility and see the rooms and ask questions. So we're hoping that will help as well with some of that uncomfortness about my child is going to a new school, and I've been in Redwood for a long time, I've been in Gregory for a long time, and we understand that it's hard. We really do, especially for those 5th grade students who, it's one grade that always has to move when you start to do things like this, and it's very, very tough. So we want to support them and their families every way we can. The teachers have been phenomenal, saying, I'll be happy to meet with the parent and the student prior to school starting, and helping them, showing them the room, and helping with that transition. So really want to thank those individuals that have done that as well. The Redwood principal update, I have on the agenda tonight a recommendation for someone who has been an interim in our district. Her name is Dr. Heather Carr. She took over Hazel Elementary School when Dr. Acevedo took a superintendency, and she was there for 2 months. And then for our assistant principal at Washington last year. And she's a very wonderful, very kind person, absolutely a very skilled educator. And I know the Redwood staff and parents are going to really enjoy working with Dr. Carr. Tomorrow they have a meeting tomorrow evening, so the families can meet Dr. Carr. And I think, again, they will find her not only to have very high standards, to be very approachable, she listens very well, and she's very excited to be going into that role. Okay, any questions from the board on any of those quick updates before I move into just a couple other items?
No questions at this time, but I just wanted to add my thank you to both Mrs. Salambino and Dr. Polera for all their hard work, and also Ms. Gogarty during this transition phase, moving the students from Gregory and Redwood to Kelly, and from Kelly to the Betty Madalena Early Learning Center. I know Betty's probably looking down on us, smiling. It's such a great honor to name the school after her. She was a wonderful educator, and she was in the district well over 30 years, almost 40 years, and she was such a sweetheart. So this is such a great honor.
Yeah, we're going to put, I've spoken to a couple of individuals that are currently in the district and a couple that have retired. They're going to assist and sit on the committee to help us form that day. Really excited. One of the things we're going to try to achieve is the fundraising for a playground, a preschool playground that we can erect and get started in there very quickly. So there'll be a lot of details coming out about the preschool and that very special day. We hope everybody can join us there. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, Ms. Levy.
I just have a couple of questions or comments from your superintendent report.
Sure.
Regarding the buses, have they done a dry run already?
They have. They do dry runs for all the runs, and they have done both of them. They've made a couple of adjustments. One of the things that we find when we do dry runs is that in the summertime, obviously the traffic is very different than when we get everybody back to school. And so They're looking at, is this really going to be an appropriate left-hand turn at this light, or is this going to take me forever to get through this light? And can they reroute certain things to try to avoid that? So that's the purpose of doing those runs, and really trying to get that timing down. Stopping for 30 seconds, making sure the child's buckled in, etc. How long does it really take? So, the first couple days, please bear with us. It takes a little time with the the traffic and what we anticipate as it being 8:05, what really turns out to be 8:11, 8:12. So just hang in there with us, and we're hoping for a very successful opening with the transportation.
Okay, thank you. Also, the out-of-district special education students, have they received their busing information yet?
They have not. They will receive that this week, and we will notify all those parents when it is coming out. One of the things we've talked about is that we're not in control of, we're not busing the students. We have to do an outside vendor, which is Sussex and Co-op. And so we are also using a new group that is through the Essex Regional. And we're hoping, we've heard from other districts that used them last year, that they did a very fine job. So we're doing it on a much smaller scale to see how well they do. And if they do well, we're going to obviously expand that where they are more interested in our success because they are part of Essex County. And we know the business administrator there well, and he wants to get the West Orange routes because he feels he can do a better job than what Sussex is doing. And Sussex is getting very big, and sometimes they've kind of outgrown what they're capable of saying they can do. So we've been critical of them and making sure that the kids are taken care of. But we're really hoping that Essex does well because we'd like to give them more business.
Okay, and finally, my last question regarding busing. As we're required to provide school buses for the parochial school students, have those runs been established yet?
They have. What you have is an aid in lieu payment, and they've increased that from $884 to $1,000 this year. When a bus costs somewhere in the ballpark of about $55,000 for one bus, when you have 15 students and you have the aid in lieu amount of $15,000, that is a huge expense to the district. And so we have worked with MKA and explained to them, because of their low numbers, the parents will be receiving that aid in lieu, and the bus will not be provided to them, and they have worked that out, and that's not something that's new. But we have worked with the other folks that we've been busing to, and all that is done. They're all worked out. We've finalized things with them, and the same goes with the parochials and privates that we do the runs prior to, so we can make sure that they're effective on that first day and those first couple of days.
Okay, thank you. You had mentioned 250 backpacks have been donated. Was it by an anonymous source or who?
Yes, an anonymous source.
You didn't mention who.
Correct,
So,
anonymous. They wanted to stay anonymous,
okay.
and I respect that. And we have been trying to work with this group, and now we are working with the group. So we're very happy to have that. And it was funny because Ms. Mordecai emailed this morning and said she was able to get some other donations. And so tomorrow morning when we have the principals meeting, I will let them know that they'll be taking 30 of them back to their buildings and doing what needs to be done. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, just to add on to that, Mr. Rutsky, over the last 4 or 5 years, I've been working with the World Organization for Positive Action, and they've been donating backpacks every year, specifically to Hazel and Washington schools, to identified students. And we were short a few backpacks, and today I was able to collect another 60 backpacks, hoping to collect
Great.
another 100.
Excellent.
By tomorrow.
Excellent. Okay, any other questions or comments? All right, I've given you the HIV report. There's a couple things to, I'm sorry, Ms. Monica, go ahead.
Okay, I was going to ask if Dr. Pallara wanted to come up and say a few words.
About what?
And about Kelly's school, the kids moving in, the whole move, and Miss Salambino as well, and Miss Gogurt, if you want to join her at the microphone, say a few words about all our efforts in getting the preschool ready and the transition.
Well, I'll be very, very sad to lose our littlest learners, but it's the right thing to do. And sometimes the right thing to do is the hardest thing to do. And I'm very, very pleased that Connie has the principalship, and I know that very, very soon you're going to learn that the job that you're honored to serve in now is the best job on the planet. The very best. On the most challenging day, it's the best job on the planet. And Kristen is a wonderful, wonderful choice to be our acting director. Kristen has always, always been a consummate professional. She's always been very, very approachable, very caring and empathetic to parents, and a wonderful colleague and friend. So I couldn't be happier for what's happened. And I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt, but I don't know. Somebody said, some famous lady said that the greatest blessing is to be able to work very hard at work that's worth doing. And that's what we've done this summer, and that's what I've done for 30 years, because I'm older than dirt. So thank you for letting me continue to do my job and serve the district in whatever way that I can. And I wish you both the very, very best, and I'll be here to support you any way I can. Both of you, my friends.
Thank you, Dr. Ferrara. It's like a changing of the guards.
Ms. Salvino, do you want to say anything to the board?
Look at me. For those of you that have known me all these years, seeing me emotional is something that you don't see too often. But I want to thank each and every one of you for the opportunity that I have had over the past 14 years in this district. From when I began as a learning consultant, to being the supervisor of special ed, to being the director of special services, to now this honor that you've given me being the principal of the Betty Madalena Learning Center. To this day, I think that Betty is up there looking down on all of us right now, just so pleased and so happy to see her legacy moving forward and to see all of us carrying it out. As far as Kristen, I cannot think of a better person to step in and take over. Kristen is a rock. She's a professional. She is a wonderful, caring educator and very empathetic. And moving forward, we will be as much of a team as we ever were, but with Kristen leading special services under your guise, and I thank all of you for that. It's our hope that we can make this early learning center just a tremendous success and the best experience that parents can now have as their first entrance to the West Orange Public Schools and the wonderful opportunities that we're going to be able to afford them. Thank you. And thank you.
I just want to again thank the board for giving me this opportunity to take on this challenge. I'm really looking forward to serving in the capacity of the acting director for the West Orange Public Schools. I want to first thank Connie. I've worked with her for numerous years. Child study team, as a supervisor, she was the director. I learned a lot, and I wish her the very best as she takes on her new position as the principal of the new Betty Madalena Early Learning Center. I think she's going to do a wonderful job. I think the parents and the students are lucky to have her there. And Joanne has always been nothing but supportive. I know she's sad to see the babies leave her building, but she knows that it's the right thing, and she's going to welcome the LLD students into her building. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Uh-oh.
We know that it's going to be a challenge for the students coming from Redwood and Gregory, especially the 5th graders. So all of us are mindful that we have to step up our game to make sure that they understand that they are part of our Kelly family now, and they will be welcomed with open arms, as will the teachers and the paraprofessionals from there. And and they will very, very soon learn like astronauts.
Thank you.
Flying to new heights. You can be the astronauts.
Okay. I've given you a document that says HIV report for 16 and 17. So there's a couple things that have to happen. Before we start the school year, we always have to report out from the January through June. So I'm just going to do a little overcap, an overview so everybody can hear what the numbers are. The HIV report, I provided all 4 documents for you. September to December, there were 12 confirmed HIV cases. January to June, there were 26 confirmed HIV cases. Overall, from September to June, there were 38 confirmed HIV cases. And just so we're all clear, which we need to report, there were 99 total HIV investigations. And again, that 99 is from September to June. So when you're looking through the document, it's a pretty simple document. We take the September through June and we break it out based on the months. And you'll only see the yeses on the documents. Now, what's interesting is last year's number is identical to this year's number. We had 38 confirmed cases last year, but the number of investigations were higher. There were 117 last year, total investigations versus the 99 for the 16-17 year. When I say last year, let me do this again. For the 15-16 year, there were 117 investigations. 38 of those were confirmed HIV. For the 16-17 year, there were 99 investigations, and 38 of those were confirmed HIV. So for purposes of the Department of Education and for everybody to see, it's important that you realize that we take this documentation, we analyze what's happening, when it's happening, where it's happening, and really go back to our buildings with our building-based groups that are part of this HIV so they can look at whether they need to make some changes. Changes could be that we need different supervision in the hallways during recess time, whatever it might be, where we see a pattern or trend that is happening with HIV. So this is something that we discuss in our administrative meetings that happened last week, and we really kind of break down and do whatever needs to be done. For a district this size, the goal is always to have 0 investigations and 0 HIV cases. I do not think that is realistic, obviously. But that's the goal, to continue to bring down the investigations and bring down the number of confirmed cases. So I just wanted to present that to you. It's on the agenda for approval. Now, we only need to approve the January to June, but I wanted you to have all of the documentation broken down from September to December and the whole year. Questions?
Yes. Mr. Rutsky, as usual, and I hate to pick on any one school, but I just quickly counted, and it's the usual. There are September to December, there are 9 cases at Liberty. Then January to June, 12. September to June, 2016 to 2017, there's 21. And the last one I wasn't finished counting yet, but I'm appalled again.
Okay, well, I certainly wouldn't be appalled because it's not that Liberty is doing something that nobody else is doing. The issue is that Liberty and every other school goes through extensive training every single year. Everybody who's involved with this goes through very extensive training so we understand what should be investigated to follow the law. And the idea is that we have students in all the schools and they make mistakes. Could there be more mistakes being made in Liberty? There could be. I don't have an answer of why Liberty has more students, but I don't have an answer why Roosevelt or Edison or the high school or the other ones have less.
And that was going to be my question.
Right.
And compared to, say, the high school where there are 2,000 kids, Liberty, has significantly less.
Yes, and again, when you're dealing with this, the training that goes in with students, the meetings we have with students, You know, when we're talking about cyberbullying training done by the prosecutor or by the FBI, they're getting the same training that the other schools are getting. So we try to counteract the mistakes that are being made. So there isn't one pattern or a reason that we can say, well, wait a minute, Liberty's not doing something that the other schools are doing, or vice versa. There just isn't something there.
Okay. Thank you.
Any? Yes.
Do you, last year, not in 15, 16, of the 38 cases, do you have the breakdown between the first half and the second half of the year?
I do not, but it's very similar. Yeah, it's very similar. And again, we're talking about a 4-month period from September to December, so I think it was 14 actually.
And the reason why I'm asking is really because this year, post-election from January to June, I was just wondering if there was any correlation to an uptick.
We didn't see one. It was very similar. In fact, the last 3 years have been very similar. Okay. And when we do the HIB and the Evers report in October, you'll also see some of this breakdown as well. It'll be broken down even further.
That's a good thing.
It's very good. All right, and lastly, so we can get on with the rest of the agenda, is all the back-to-school nights are on the website. You know, any information about transportation, any contact info, anything of that nature. If you need help, please go there. Speak to the principal directly. If you need help beyond there, by all means, reach out. We have athletics starting. We have a lot of different things that are going on. That's all listed on our website, so you can be part of that. That's all I have, Ms. Mordecai.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rutsky. Are there any questions from the public on any agenda items? Mrs. Newsom?
I don't need to monopolize the microphone. Amber Newsom, 18 Martin Road. It's about the special needs audit. I do have 2 children who are gone through the system of special needs, and we have run into some difficulty. So my questions are, with the audit, what are you looking to find? Are you looking to find how effective the special needs program is at West Orange? And if so, are you looking, are you comparing it to best practices in the field, or comparing it to other programs?
It's not a back and forth, we answer at the end.
Yeah. Just go ahead and ask your questions, and we'll respond after everybody's done.
Oh, okay.
That's okay.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Seeing none?
So, Ms. Newsom, the 2 major pieces we're looking for is, what are we doing well, and where can we improve? And that is as global as it gets. What are we doing well in every aspect of the Special Services Department, and where can we improve? From a parent who maybe had the opportunity to go through the process and their child wasn't eligible, how did that go? Was the parent educated? Did they understand what their options were? All the way to a child who's been in a program for a long time, maybe switched programs. Every single thing is being evaluated, and that feedback that you can provide in the survey, and if you can come to the parent meeting, would be really helpful, because that face-to-face and direct specific comments being made about your experiences will be part of that, so we can then look at what the findings are and create action plans around that to start making improvements, but then also to celebrate what's going well, and to kind of emphasize, okay, we're realizing that we're doing these things really well, but these are things that we need to improve, and here's how we're going to go about doing that.
Thank you. Okay. May I have a motion for personnel, letter A, 1 to 5, including the addendum?
I'll move that.
A second.
That is inclusive of the change on letter B as well in the amount. It's not 60,692, it's 30,992 at the bottom of page 3.
1 through 5 or 1 through 6? 6 or 1 through 5?
Wait.
1 through 5.
No, it's 1 through 5.
Okay.
We also have some changes or some, on page 3 of the personnel addendum, or the actual agenda. The 3rd, the 6th, the 7th, and the 9th name should have prorated underneath the salary.
Okay.
So it's the 3rd, the 6th, the 7th, and 9th name. And then I'm actually going back to page 2. The first name under number 3, Stephanie Farrow, that should also be prorated too.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Calavano. Okay.
Just would like to make one comment. I'd like to thank Mr. Arcurio for his tenure here in our district. He's moving on to be a superintendent in Lebanon.
Lebanon Township.
Lebanon Township. So I do want to thank him for his time here.
Yes, I concur. And he's also closer to home, so.
A lot closer.
Okay. Any further comments or discussion by the board? I'm sorry, you made the motion, Mrs. Lau. Was there a second?
Mr. Robinson.
Mr. Robinson, thank you. Mr. Calavano.
Mr. Charles?
Items 1 through 5, yes.
Mrs. Lab?
Yes.
Mr. Robertson?
Yes.
Vice President Schwartzbaum?
Yes.
President Mordecai?
Yes. Okay. For personnel, item number 6, may I please have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Can we delineate merit goals 2, 3, and 5, just so we have it?
Certainly will. Merit goal number 2 is regarding the guidance evaluation. Merit goal number 3 is the strategic plan, the 5-year strategic plan. The goal was to complete 70% of year 1. And merit goal number 5 was the demography study to assess and alleviate overcrowding. Any further discussion by the board? Questions, comments? Okay. Mr. Calavano?
Mr. Charles?
Mr. Calvano, I'm the vice counsel. I must abstain because of conflict.
Mrs. Lab?
Yes.
Mr. Robertson?
Yes.
Vice President Schwartzbaum?
Yes.
President Mordecai?
Yes. Okay. May I please have a motion for curriculum and instruction, items 1 through 6?
I'll move that.
I'll second.
Any discussion by the board? Okay, just want to let the public know that item number 6, attachment 12, is a resolution to participate in Future Ready Schools. This is a partnership that we are involved in with New Jersey Institute for Technology in Newark. And this is an initiative of the New Jersey School Boards Association, which we learned about last year. And school districts throughout the state of New Jersey are encouraged to participate. And there's also a certification process. And with that will come some grant funding. So excited about that initiative. Roll call, Mr. Calavano?
Mr. Charles?
Yes.
Mrs. Lab?
Yes.
Mr. Robertson?
Yes.
Vice President Schwartzbaum?
Yes.
President Mordecai?
Yes. May I have a motion, please, for finance, special services? 1 through 5, business 1 through 21.
I'll move that.
May I have a second?
I will second.
Any discussion by the board? Okay, I have one. Okay, I know that we've discussed this from time to time, but whenever I see a reduction in amount, I always ask these questions. But Mr. Calavano, is it possible for us to receive back the reduction amount whenever there's a reduction with the ESIP plan, as opposed to putting it back into a project?
We have that opportunity to have it back, but there are other projects that need to be done. We have a list of them, and we decided if funds were to become available, we would start taking care of that list.
Okay. I'd like to take this opportunity to again emphasize that the board, and I'm going to speak for all of my colleagues because I know they joined me in this request, we would like an ESIP update whenever we can get Honeywell to come in and Mr. Siggy, so that we can know exactly what's going on with that project. It's been some time since we've seen them.
Yes, I am aware, and as I said to you, Mr. Ziggy has been out today and all of last week. As I noted, I wanted to have the ESIP update for you.
Yes.
We certainly didn't need to add another presentation tonight. Being it was kind of long, and
I understand.
So we're going to provide that to you and obviously to the public coming up soon.
Okay. Just want to emphasize that we don't forget about it. Okay, Mr. Calavano, roll call.
Can we break, item number 12, so we have an item number 13. So we're recommending that we hire a law firm, Cleary Alfiera Jacobs for not to exceed $150,000. Then we're also we have a recommendation for Mefessel and Werblin to do special ed, and this is in addition to Cleary Giacombi, Matt Giacombi's firm. So do we have, first of all, what are these law firms doing? And the second question is, what is our total legal expense versus where we were in the last 2-3 years?
So number 13, this firm addresses special ed only. They deal with special ed only, and the other firm, number 12, deal with the labor and negotiations, engineering, etc., contracts. They deal with that. But the second firm only deals with special ed. The first firm has a special ed option, but when we're talking about other things directly related, it's mainly the group, Mefessel and Werble, are dealing with the special ed. Now, we, in the last few years, we've been in the ballpark when you add up the expense for the in-house counsel. We are basically at the same exact place. With negotiations, we're at about 192 this year. But again, we had 4 bargaining units, so we were trying to wrap up. We're basically right about or a little bit more where we were in the last year because of the in-house counsel salary, the benefits that went with that, etc.
Right. So, and clearly, that's Matt Giacombi's firm?
Well, that's both the firms that we're using here, and that's Mr. Giacobbi's firm. That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
And remember, with the second firm, usually when there's a claim that goes to the insurance company appoints a legal counsel, and that's the firm that they appoint.
Right. Okay. You know, one of the things too, it's important that, for instance, when we do residency hearings, when we find that somebody is trying to live in West Orange, and then they come in and lie about it, we have taken them to task, and we have gone and asked for tuition reimbursement, and we have won every single case this year that we have gone after. Somewhere in the tune of $10,000 to $20,000 for each one of those individuals. Now, many times we set up payment plans because, you know, we understand, but that's something that contributes to that overall cost, because we are representing, the attorney is representing us when they're going to the tuition, or going after the tuition, I should say. So when you start adding up 5 or 10 individuals that are now paying tuition that didn't pay tuition before at the cost of $10,000 to $20,000, that money's coming back to us as well.
call, Mr. Calavano?
Mr. Charles?
Yes.
Mrs. Ladd?
Yes.
Mr. Robertson?
Yes.
Vice President Schwartzbaum?
Yes.
President Mordecai?
Yes. May I have a motion for, let's see, board reports?
I'll move the HIV report.
I will second.
Thank you. Any discussion by the board? Roll call, Mr. Calavano?
Mr. Charles?
Yes.
Mrs. Ladd?
Yes.
Mr. Robertson?
Yes.
Vice President Schwartzbaum?
Yes.
President Mordecai?
Yes. Okay, now it's time for report from board members and president. Mr. Robertson, would you like to go first?
I have nothing new to report.
Mr.
It's
Schwartzbaum?
summer.
Yes, it is.
I will say that I was sorry that I was away during the March for Unity that involved Essex Rising and the HRC and West Orange African Heritage, because it came at a critical time and reinforced an important message in our community that we will not tolerate bigotry, we will not tolerate racism, we will not tolerate violence. It was the coverage that I saw in the paper and in social media was very touching in terms of the number of people who came out and just and the sentiments that were shared. I'm sorry I missed it.
Well, actually, there's going to be another one.
All righty.
Yes, I was getting my nails done yesterday, and Mike Taylor walked in.
Yes,
and,
there is going to be another one.
Mike Taylor came into Cocoa Nails the other day with a flyer, and Labor Day at 9 a.m. at Town Hall,
Yes,
there's going to be another one.
All righty.
So,
And I actually attended that first one, and it was very good, very somber. Quite a few great speeches. Dr. Calfani was one of the speakers.
He's always good.
It was very moving, very emotional. And I see Mr. Alper in the back there. He was also there. I thought at some point we were going to hold hands and sing or something, but it was quite moving. And I was waiting for the holding hands part, but nothing came. But it was very moving, and as you said, Mr. Robertson, we're going through tough times now, and that was, representative of exactly what West Orange is. We are a family, and we come together in certain times. But I do want to say that I've been watching the Hurricane Harvey on TV, and it's just so sad, and I just remember Hurricane Sandy and Hurricane Katrina, and my thoughts go out to all the families in Texas going through the flood and all the tragedy right now. This is sad.
well, in West Orange, we do act as family. I mean, we fight like brothers and sisters, but
Yes, we
yesterday,
do.
or last couple of days, everybody was looking for Charlie. Right? Charlie.
Yes.
The little Yorkie. Charlie was found. I was driving. I ran into friends. Everybody was looking for Charlie in the
That's
St.
true.
Cloud area, and Charlie made it home. So
Yes.
the West Orange does come together when we need to.
Yes.
I do want to thank the superintendent, though. We had just approved and passed the merit goals, and I know how hard the superintendent worked on every one of those, particularly the strategic plan, which was a bear. I mean, it was just incredible. So, Jeff, thank you. Thank you for all the hard work that you did for our district, and we still have one more goal that we'll take care of next meeting when the audit is complete, but thank you very much for all that hard work.
You're welcome.
Okay.
I agree, Mrs. Ladd. Mr. Rutsky has worked very, very hard for us over the last few years, and in particular this past year. There was a lot of work that went into the strategic plan, and if the public was to see the backup that we get for all this stuff, lots of boxes of lots of paper, and that's what we do on the weekends. The board members sit home and read all the backup, and I'm sure it's very, very difficult for everyone to put all the documents together, and I'm looking at Mrs. DeMendez. They didn't have much of a summer, Mr. Rutsky or Ms. DeMendez or Mr. Calavano, and during spring break, they were all here working and getting everything together. So I do want to add my thank you as well to you, Mr. Rutsky, Ms. DeMendez, and the administration for all your hard work.
Absolutely.
Mr. Charles?
I want to thank my time for that.
Oh, I was leaving the pep rally for you.
No, it's quite all right.
It's next Friday, pep rally at West Orange High School next Friday.
Next Thursday.
Next Thursday, see, that's why you're supposed to do it.
Next Thursday, 7 p.m.
I don't have an athlete anymore. Okay. Next Thursday, 7 p.m. at West Orange High School. If you don't know how to dance, that's a great opportunity to learn. You will see Coach Zakella with all his moves. Yes. And also, and also the honors teacher, Craig Champagne. He'll be there with his moves too, I'm sure. You'll be surprised at how flexible, I guess he is, and all of our cheerleaders and everyone else, having a good time promoting all of our sports. It's a really good time. It's great music, and it's a huge turnout. It's such a great, opening of the school year to see all the kids and all the athletes come out with the coaches. So hopefully you guys will be able to fit that into your schedule, and I'm sure Mrs. Cummings will be there. She's always there. So with that. Mr. Schwartzbaum?
Just follow up. I just wanted to reiterate the request on the ESIP to get an analysis of the actual versus projections. Also, what's still outstanding on the reverse auction, what our actual versus projection is as far as the savings, as well as an impact analysis of the medical plans for this year.
I concur.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Schwartzbaum. With that said, the next Board of Education meeting will be September 18th at this time. We may have to add a meeting before that, but it may be a Board of Ed workshop. We do have a board self-evaluation to work on, and so it might happen before the 18th, but according to statute, if we do schedule a meeting before the September 18th meeting, we will advise the public and it will be posted. With that, if any member of the public wants to come up and ask questions, it's time for petitions and hearings from the residents.
Hi, Joy Burnett, 63 Peacock Place. I'm just going to be really quick. This is something I addressed last year, and I kind of just wanted to revisit it, and especially in lieu of what the report that's stated that West Orange is getting less white. I asked last year about diversity in staffing, and shouldn't the staff reflect the community? And I'm not seeing that myself. I'm seeing that I mentioned that Hazel at the time, did not have one black teacher the entire time my children were there. So there was one that a teacher came over last year. She was moved from Roosevelt. So I don't want to see us shuffling teachers. I would like to see a plan for hiring more teachers that look like my children. And then I also asked for if we could have some sensitivity training, and I stated some of the incidences and experiences that my children and I have had in the district, and I was told that that was something that we could do, but there was no sensitivity training done last year at all. And I know Mrs. Mordecai mentioned the Holocaust program, but that is being directed at social studies teachers. It's not open to the entire staff. And also, there needs to be something that's not done voluntarily. There needs to be a mandatory sensitivity, and I'm aware from attending the other board meetings that parents were also concerned about sensitivity for LGBT. So there needs to be something across the board, but I want to make sure that the ethnic side of it is not left out, because we are, the LGBT has been brought up on several board meetings. So I want to just make sure that if something is going to be done, first of all, something should be done, but if it's going to be inclusive, I want to make sure it's inclusive for all of our students so that the children don't have to come to school and feel that they're being slighted by teachers. And not intentionally, people just don't know. It's just basic ignorance over a lot of issues, and with my experience and the experience of my children.
Thank you, Ms. Burnett.
Good evening. Yvonne Ferrer, 19 Auburn Road. Dear Board of Education members, I would like to bring to your attention a personal situation I need your help with in regards of an approval for one of my daughter's transportation services. Emma, my daughter, is a 5-year-old special education student who was attending Kelly Elementary School. Given she is a special education, she had an IEP, but after the mandatory test, before going to kindergarten, she was declassified as the results were average, and she lost the transportation services she was receiving. Now, my second daughter, Daphne, is an 8-year-old special education student who attends St. Cloud Elementary School. She currently has an IEP and hence receives transportation services. Since Daphne will be picked up and dropped off at our home by the school bus, we petitioned Mr. Rutsky with a letter delivered in person to his office to allow Emma to ride on the same bus as Daphne, given the pickup and drop-off points will be the same for both. As a clarification, such letter was received and dated stamped by Mr. Rutsky's office on June 6, 2017. A copy will be attached. Understanding that the school cycle was closing and the summer vacations approaching, we waited a reasonable amount of time to get an answer back, but we didn't. This is why I called Mr. Rutsky's office on August 7 to inquire about the status on our petition. 3 days later, on August 10, I received a call from Mr. Rutsky asking if somebody had called me regarding my case. I told him that nobody had called me, and I explained to him the situation. He acknowledged my petition and said he didn't see any problem for Emma to ride the bus with her sister. To conclude, we agreed that I would send by email the letter I originally delivered to his office, and he will review it, and he will call me at the end of the day to reconfirm. August 21st, I sent him an email just to do a quick follow-up, since I didn't hear from him. But to our surprise, on August 22nd, a lady from the West Orange Department of Transportation called me on Mr. Ruskett's behalf to inform me that he had denied the petition, citing the distance from the school to our house. This is why, distinguished board members, I am kindly requesting your intervention in this matter so the transportation services for Emma are approved. To this effect, may I please give you the following supporting reasons. Number one, due to my husband's job, we need to relocate every couple of years. This has put a tremendous stress on both of our kids. Two, because this is difficult for both girls to adapt to new schools, we're requesting this, so this will ease, this adaptation for both of them. Number three, Emma will greatly benefit from having her big sister's company during the transportation to and from school because she's afraid of going to her new school. She's been asking me, Mommy, I want to go to Kelly, I want to go to Kelly. I said, well, you have to go to St. Cloud now. Number four, we do know want Emma to have a regression on her social and academic skills due to the stress of not riding the school bus with her sister. Number five, on the economic side, if Emma is a happy and stable child, she is less likely to be reclassified, therefore saving financial resources to the school district. And number six, finally, there is no extra cost whatsoever for the school district if Emma rides the same school bus as her sister. It's the same route, same house, same pickup and drop-off points. It's just a matter of adding one extra kid to the bus. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Burnett.
Attached, you will find the emails and the letter.
Thank you. Mrs. Rowe?
That sounds like an important situation, and didn't want to let the night go by without talking about our teachers that, I've spent 15 years, I guess Luke is going to graduate this year, and so I've been here a really long time, but what I saw, Mrs. Cohen was Maddie's and Luke's, 7th grade tech teacher and teacher of the year, Chamber of Commerce teacher of the year last year, and the networking that Mr. Moore and the teachers did with Ebony, I think is amazing, and I think it's not something that we've really seen a lot of. And we've been so distracted with contracts and, bad PR that we miss the point that seems to be, happening anyway. And I'm really happy about that. I can tell you that all of the folks I know that have to move from Kelly to the preschool and from Redwood and Gregory to Kelly all know that it's not going to be such a big deal because of Miss Blair. That Joanne is just the one thing that I really like my homeschool, but we have Joanne now. So I think that that's a great move. And the Kristen Gogarty and Connie Salabino, moving them into their new positions. I can tell you that Luke was in kindergarten at St. Cloud in 17 years ago or 16 years ago. No, that's not right. Anyway, in kindergarten. And I get the phone call from Dr. Bruno that Luke and Ms. Gogarty, who was his case manager at the time, were in the library and nobody could go in and I needed to get to school quick. So I get to school and I find Kristen Gogarty under the desk with Luke and a baseball. And she was playing with Luke and Luke was crying and they were okay, but she was under the table with him. And I've seen her grow since 2000 all the way through, and she, left being his case manager, and I was really bummed out about that, but I saw that she got to benefit so many more kids as being the supervisor, and even more kids as being the director, the acting director. So I really hope that she becomes the director, and that this series of moves in, what seemed like a really long summer has been great. And I'm excited about 2017-18 Mountaineer year. Thank you. We'll shut up now.
Thank you, Mrs. Brill. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Rutsky?
Okay, Ms. Burnett, where did she get to? Okay, so yes, we've been researching, we have it narrowed down for diversity and sensitivity training. And as I said last year, we certainly are going to make that a priority for this year. You have to understand when you train 1,100 employees, that doesn't happen where you can just pull a few here, pull a few there. So it's got to be thought out well, how we're going to get everybody trained, etc. So that is in the works. That's definitely going to happen. As I said last year, that certainly would. The issue, ma'am, and I won't go into too much depth with it, but as indicated about the busing, their general education students can't ride the special education bus, so that students are picked up and taken to their school when students are classified. Obviously, if your other child, I know you said she was declassified or she would be classified, then that would change things. But that's consistent across the district. And look, I'd love to try to help you with this, but I can't say no to one person and say yes to the next person. And that's a consistent pattern that happens across the district. Again, I'll be glad to talk to you afterwards a little bit more about it. And Ms. Bro, I think you were complimenting Ms. Gogarty quite a bit, and we agree. She's just outstanding, and we really think that she's going to be tremendous in that role, and very excited. But there's lots of stories like you're sharing, lots and lots of stories.
Thank you, Mr. Rutsky. I just wanted to add, Ms. Burnett, when I mentioned about the Holocaust, that was one portion, but the district belongs to the Kean University Diversity Council. That's a different thing from the Holocaust program. So, but I know that we have diversity training. I don't know if we have sensitivity training consistently. We've had it in the past, but we didn't have it last year. It has not been consistent. I'll admit that's not consistent, but we've had some diversity training in the past.
Excuse me. You made actually 2 points. One was about diversity recruitment. And while we did begin outreach to HBCUs and Hispanic service institutions, we have not held a diversity recruitment job fair that would network all the universities that are feeder schools in far over a decade. It's like 14 years or something like that. Number one. Number two, the diversity, quote, training that was occurring, and Mr. Rutsky actually admitted this to all of us last year, was that we weren't doing any true diversity or diversity or cross-cultural training. There was somebody who gave a brief talk to new incoming teachers, but that's not the type of interactive cross-cultural diversity training that constitutes a legitimate training, where you learn about sensitivities to different cultural nuances, you get to understand more about the cultures, and you know, it opens up a whole, we have teachers who want to do the right thing or try their best to do the right thing. We owe it to them, as well as to the children, to the parents, to give them the tools and the training to do that. So I understand that that's what you're talking about.
Mr. Rutsky, you
Yeah, Ms. Mordecai and I spoke this morning actually about a job fair, and so that is going to be taking place. Again, it takes time to get that organized and communicate with all the outreaches that need to happen. So that's definitely going to happen in the very near future.
Yes, Mr. Robertson, you and I agree, but you didn't allow me to finish, but it's okay. What Mr. Rutsky is saying is correct. I actually called him this morning. I said there are a few appointments on the agenda, and as we're going through the process of looking for a new supervisor or a new principal for Redwood School, it would be good if we scheduled a, not just regular diversity, but a total minority fair, including males. We don't have a lot of male teachers, if you think about it. So he is putting that together, actually. So with that, motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All right. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone. Please get home safe.